Hey everyone. Welcome back for the third and final part of The Founding Fathers. As always, huge thanks to all of my Patreons. Making these videos would be impossible without you guys' support, especially with all the restrictions YouTube places on my type of content. After this video, feel free to head over there, where you can find about 50 other different stories to enjoy. Also, feel free to send me any messages over there if you have any questions or even if you just want to chat. Link to all of that will be in the description. Anyways, everyone, enjoy the video. Chapter 10, The Sage's Peace. The peace that followed what historians would later dub the First Shinobi World War was a strange, brutal thing. It was not a peace born of mutual understanding or shared ideals, but one imposed by a display of power so absolute it had fractured the world's concept of warfare. Nations did not lay down their arms out of a newfound love for their neighbors, they did so because they had peered over the edge of the abyss and seen a golden god staring back. This new era was not the Pax Konoha, the peace of the leaf, so much as it was the Pax Naruto. The sage's peace. And it was a peace that rested on the shoulders of one man. Upon their return from Uzushio-Gakure, Naruto, Toka, and Satsuki found a village transformed. The frantic energy of war had been replaced by a confident, almost arrogant swagger. Konoha was the undisputed heart of the shinobi world, and it knew it. The markets were busier, the training grounds were filled with a new generation of children who sparred with an inherited pride, and the great wooden walls, which had so recently repelled an army, now felt less like a defense and more like the border of a sacred land. Naruto's return was met with a reverence that bordered on worship. When he walked the streets, shinobi would stop and bow, not just with the respect due to a superior, but with the awe reserved for a living legend. He was their shield, their divine deterrent, the reason they could sleep soundly at night. He accepted it with his usual easy grace, but inwardly, the adoration was a heavier burden than any battle. It was a constant reminder of the power that set him apart, a gilded cage of loneliness. The true shift, however, was in the dynamic between the three of them. The shared danger and forced intimacy of their mission had burned away the last of their professional distance. Toka's playful prodding was now laced with a genuine, familiar warmth. Satsuki's stoic observance was now punctuated by moments of shared understanding, a quiet glance that spoke volumes. They had left Konoha as a political delegation and returned as a unit, a strange and powerful triumvirate of Sage, Senju, and Uchiha. This new reality was not lost on the village's leaders. In the Hokage's office, a week after their return, the four men who formed the core of Konoha's strength gathered. The mood was not one of celebration, but of tense calculation. The envoys are arriving daily, Hashirama said, gesturing to a massive pile of scrolls on his desk. He looked exhausted, the duties of a peacetime Hokage clearly more taxing on him than any war. The Raikage sends his apologies and gifts. The Tsuchikage requests a trade agreement. The Kazekage wants to discuss the philosophical principles of Jinchuriki cooperation. He snorted. They're not seeking alliances. They're seeking reassurance that we won't annihilate them. Let them be afraid, Madara stated from his position by the window, his arms crossed. Fear is the only language they understand. It is the bedrock of this peace. His gaze flickered to Naruto. A bedrock you provided. Tobirama, ever the analyst, pushed a map across the table. Our position is unprecedented. But it is also unstable. Our strength is consolidated in one individual. His eyes, as always, held a deep, lingering suspicion when he looked at Naruto. An individual whose origins are still a mystery, and whose Hiraishin technique remains a physical impossibility. We must integrate this power into the village structure more formally, more permanently. Hashirama's face lit up with a sudden, brilliant idea. It was the well-meaning, unsubtle look of a man about to solve a complex political problem with the grace of a charging bull. Tobirama is right. We need to bind you closer to the village, Naruto. To its future. He beamed at his friend. You need a family. Naruto, who had been quietly listening, felt a sudden sense of dread. Hashirama. Think of it. The first Hokage continued, completely missing the warning signs. You are the guardian sage, a hero to the people. You need roots. A wife, children. It would bring you happiness, and it would show the world that you are truly committed to Konoha's future. He looked pointedly at his aunt, Toka, who had just entered the office to deliver a report. My aunt Toka is strong, intelligent, and one of the most respected women in the village. She understands you. It would be a perfect match. A union of the Senju and our guardian sage. Toka, who had stopped dead in her tracks, stared at her nephew, her expression a perfect mask of disbelief. A faint blush crept up her neck, a rare crack in her composed demeanor. Before Naruto could even process the suggestion, Madara spoke, his voice cool and cutting. A sentimental thought, Hashirama. But a strategically naive one. He turned his gaze to Naruto, his mangekyo spinning almost imperceptibly. To bind our guardian to the Senju alone would create a new imbalance. The other clans, especially the Uchiha, would see it as a consolidation of power. It would breed resentment. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. If a political marriage is to be considered for the sake of the village's stability, then the candidate must represent a bond that bridges the two founding clans. He looked at Naruto, his expression unreadable. My cousin, Satsuki, is the most celebrated kunoichi of her generation. She is a captain of the police force, respected for her skill and her unwavering loyalty. A union between her and the guardian sage would be the ultimate symbol of our village's unity. It would prove, once and for all, that the will of fire burns in both Senju and Uchiha hearts. The room fell silent. Naruto was trapped, pinned between the well-meaning sentimentality of his best friend and the cold, hard political maneuvering of his greatest rival. They were no longer just his friends, they were clan leaders, playing a game of go with his life as the board. I don't think, Naruto stammered, feeling more cornered than he had at the Citadel. He is overwhelmed by your generous offers, Tobirama interjected dryly, his voice a welcome interruption. Perhaps we should allow the guardian sage to consider the strategic advantages of both proposals at his leisure. He gave Naruto a look that was almost, but not quite, sympathetic. Naruto seized the opening. Yes. I need to consider the advantages. Strategically. He practically fled the office, leaving the two most powerful clan leaders in the world to glare at each other over a political battlefield of their own making. The training grounds were Satsuki's sanctuary. Here, the world was simple. There was only the hiss of a perfectly executed fireball jutsu, the thud of a kunai hitting its mark, the clean, precise movements of a kata. Here, there were no complicated emotions, no political machinations, only the elegant, deadly mathematics of combat. He looked like a cornered fox, Toka commented, landing silently beside her as Satsuki finished a complex series of hand seals. Their training sessions had become a daily ritual since their return, a continuation of the bond they had forged at sea. He was, Satsuki replied, not breaking her rhythm as she launched a volley of shuriken, each one embedding itself perfectly in the center of a distant target. My cousin and your nephew have turned his personal life into a political asset. It is a logical, if crude, tactic. Crude is Hashirama's specialty, Toka said with a wry smile. And logical is Madara's. And Naruto is caught in the middle. She stopped smiling, her expression growing more serious as she watched Satsuki. And so are we. Satsuki paused, lowering her hands. She turned to face the Senju woman. It is my duty to do what is best for my clan and for the village. If a marriage to the guardian sage ensures the Uchiha's place and secures the peace, then it is a duty I will accept. A duty? Toka raised an eyebrow. Is that all it is to you, Satsuki? You spent 2 months with him. You saw him calm a raging sea, you saw him earn the respect of his family, you saw him put his life on the line for a principle. Do you truly see him as just a duty? Satsuki's stoic mask faltered for a fraction of a second. She thought of the quiet conversations in the Ozushio library, of the way he spoke of the Baiju not as monsters but as lonely friends, of the calm strength in his eyes when he had looked at her and spoken of a peace built on trust, not fear. He is a remarkable individual, she admitted, her voice quiet. His philosophy is compelling. He's a good man, Satsuki, Toka said softly. A lonely, ridiculously powerful, and occasionally clueless man who is carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. He deserves more than a political match. He deserves a partner. She smirked, her usual confidence returning. And frankly, I think he needs a woman who can keep him on his toes. Satsuki looked at Toka, at the fierce intelligence and challenging spirit in her eyes, and understood. This was no longer just about clan politics. For both of them, it had become personal. Deep within the Uchiha compound, in the cold, silent chamber of the Naka shrine, Madara stood before the ancient stone tablet. The air was heavy with the ghosts of his ancestors, with the weight of his clan's cursed history. In the 6 years of peace, he had spent countless hours here, his Mangekyo Sharingan deciphering the cryptic text, trying to understand the true nature of power. He had seen the path his canon self would have taken, the path of the infinite Tsukiyomi, a path of forced, artificial peace. But the world he lived in now was different. His bond with Hashirama, though strained, had never broken. His respect for Naruto, though grudging, was undeniable. The village was real, it was thriving, and it was his. It was in this moment of quiet contemplation that a presence emerged from the stone floor behind him. It did not appear with a jutsu or a sound. It simply rose. A being of pure black, its form a shifting, amorphous mockery of a human shape, with a single, unsettling yellow eye. Madara Uchiha, the voice was a dry, ancient whisper, a sound like sand scraping on stone. You have deciphered the tablet. You have seen the truth. The path to true salvation. Madara did not turn. His gaze remained fixed on the tablet. I have seen a story, he replied, his voice calm and even. A story of a god tree and a moon's eye plan. A story of a mother's will. It is not a story. It is your destiny, Black Zetsu hissed, its form coalescing further. You are the heir of Indra, the one destined to reclaim the sage's power and bring true order to this chaotic world. Hashirama's dream of trust is a fool's hope. It will fail. Humanity will always revert to conflict. Only you, with the power of the Rinnegan and the infinite Tsukiyomi, can save them from themselves. Madara was silent for a long moment. He felt the pull of the words, the seductive logic of absolute power. It was the answer to every doubt, every fear, every moment of humiliation he had ever felt. It was the path to becoming unchallengeable. And you, Madara said, still not turning. Who are you to speak to me of my destiny? You feel ancient. Like a shadow clinging to the world's memory. I am the will of the Uchiha given form, Black Zetsu lied smoothly. I am the manifestation of our clan's long history, here to guide its greatest son to his rightful place. I see, Madara said. He finally turned, his Mangekyo Sharingan locking onto the black creature. There was no surprise in his eyes, no anger. Only a cold, analytical curiosity. You wish for me to follow this path. To betray my friend, to enslave the world in a dream, all to fulfill a destiny you have laid out for me. It is the only way, Zetsu insisted. Madara gave a slow, deliberate nod. Your words have merit. The logic is sound. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps Hashirama's path is one of weakness. He feigned contemplation. I will consider what you have said. Return to me when the moon is full. We will speak of this destiny again. Black Zetsu's single eye widened slightly, a flicker of triumph in its depths. It had worked. The hook was set. As you wish, heir of Indra, it whispered, and with a faint ripple, it sank back into the stone floor, vanishing as silently as it had appeared. 1 week later, under the light of the full moon, Black Zetsu rose once more from the floor of the Naka shrine. Madara stood waiting for him, his back to the entrance. You have considered my offer, Zetsu whispered, its voice filled with triumphant anticipation. I have, Madara replied, his voice a low, resonant baritone. Your path is the only logical choice. The world needs a savior. It needs a king. He turned, his Mangekyo blazing. I accept my destiny. Excellent, Zetsu hissed, moving closer. The first step is to reclaim the Rinnegan. You must take Hashirama's cells. A battle must be staged. Yes, Madara agreed. A battle. He looked directly at the creature. But not against Hashirama. He pressed his thumb against his collar, and a sharp pulse of Uchiha chakra flared from the spot. The world behind Black Zetsu tore open in a flash of yellow light. Naruto stepped through, not in his usual attire, but cloaked in the blazing golden light of his complete six-path sage mode. 9 black truth-seeking orbs hovered behind him like miniature planets, and in his hand, he held a black staff, radiating an aura that negated all ninjutsu. Black Zetsu froze, its single yellow eye widening in utter, absolute disbelief. It could not comprehend what was happening. This boy. This anomaly. How could he be here? How could he wield that power? Hello, Zetsu, Naruto said, his voice calm, but echoing with the power of a god. I believe you were looking for me. The ancient parasite, the will of Kaguya, the shadow that had moved kings and orchestrated centuries of conflict, could only stare, its millennia-long plan unraveling in an instant before a power it had never accounted for. It had prepared for Indra's heir, for Ashura's heir, for the cycle of hatred. It had never, ever prepared for the boy who had broken the cycle completely. Who? What? Are you? Black Zetsu stammered, its form trembling. Naruto smiled, a sad, final smile. I'm the end of your story. He raised his staff. The truth-seeking orb at its tip pulsed with a light that was not light, but pure, absolute void. The end of a shadow had come, not with a great war, but with a quiet, impossible checkmate. The future was finally, truly, in human hands. 1 week earlier, the moment the presence was gone from the Naka shrine, Madara turned and walked out. He didn't go to his own quarters. He went directly to the Hokage Tower. The emergency meeting was held in Hashirama's private study, a room shielded by the strongest privacy seals Tobirama could devise. Only the 4 of them were present. Madara recounted his encounter in the Naka shrine, his voice flat and precise, leaving out no detail. He spoke of the black creature, its claims of being the Uchiha's will, and its talk of the infinite Tsukuyomi. Hashirama listened, his face growing paler with each word. Tobirama's expression was a mask of grim fascination, his scientific mind trying to categorize a being that defied all known principles of life. But Naruto was not surprised. He listened with a heavy heart, the final, missing piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He had wondered where Black Zetsu was, why the ancient manipulator had not yet made its move. Now he knew. It had been waiting, biding its time, trying to work its poison into the soul of the one man it believed was its key. This creature, Madara concluded, his gaze fixed on Naruto, it spoke of things only referenced in the most secret parts of the tablet. It knew of Indra and Ashura. It is ancient, and it is patient. And it is trying to turn me against you, Hashirama. Against this village. Hashirama looked at his friend, his eyes filled with a profound gratitude and relief. You came to us. You told us. You did not let its poison take root. This village is as much mine as it is yours, Madara stated simply. I will not see it destroyed by a whispering shadow with a god complex. He turned his full attention to Naruto. You do not look surprised. It is as if you were expecting this. Naruto met his gaze. The time for half-truths was over. I was, he admitted. I have encountered a being like that before. A long time ago. He took a deep breath. It calls itself the will of the Uchiha, but it is not. It is something far older, and far more dangerous. It is the will of a being named Kaguya Otsutsuki, the mother of the Sage of Six Paths. Its only goal is to revive her. And the infinite Tsukuyomi is the key. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. Tobirama stared, his mind reeling at the mention of a name from the dawn of myth. Hashirama looked utterly bewildered. But Madara simply nodded, as if a complex equation had finally been solved. So, the shadow has a name, Madara said. And a goal. How do we kill it? It can't be killed by normal means, Naruto explained. It can regenerate, it can possess others, it can hide in the very fabric of the world. It is not a shinobi. It is a parasite. He looked at Madara, a new, sharp plan forming in his mind. But it has a weakness. It's arrogant. It believes you are its pawn. We will use that arrogance to set a trap. He walked over to Madara. The next time it appears, you will do as it asks. You will agree to its plan. You will lead it to believe it has won. He placed a hand on Madara's shoulder. And while you are talking, I want you to channel a small, sharp pulse of your chakra right here. A faint, almost invisible Hiraishin seal, glowing with a soft golden light, appeared on the collar of Madara's armor for a fraction of a second before fading. What is that? Madara asked, his Sharingan unable to fully perceive the complex formula. It's a key, Naruto said with a cold smile. A key that will open a door directly to you, from anywhere in the world. When you activate it, I will be there in the space of a heartbeat. He looked at the three of them, his expression one of absolute resolve. This shadow has manipulated my friends and my family for 1,000 years. Its story ends now. The politics of peace. The silence in the Naka shrine was profound, broken only by the faint whisper of dust settling where a millennium of manipulation had just been erased. Madara Uchiha stared at the empty space, then at Naruto, who stood breathing steadily, the last vestiges of his divine power receding into the calm of his mortal form. The weight of a false destiny had been lifted from Madara's shoulders, leaving behind not a void, but a startling, unfamiliar clarity. So, the will of the Uchiha, Madara said, his voice a low, sardonic murmur, was nothing more than a parasite seeking to resurrect its mother. He turned his gaze to the ancient stone tablet, the source of so much of his clan's pride and torment. With a single, fluid motion, he raised his hand. Susanoo. A colossal, spectral ribcage flickered into existence around him. A single, armored fist of pure chakra slammed into the section of the tablet detailing the infinite Tsukuyomi. The ancient stone, which had endured for centuries, cracked and shattered, the prophecy of the moon's eye plan turning to rubble and dust. It was an act of finality, a definitive rejection of the path he was meant to walk. The world does not need a false dream, Madara stated, letting the Susanoo fade. It needs a tangible one. He looked at Naruto, his Mangekyo holding not rivalry, but a new, complex respect. The events of this night. They remain between the four of us. Hashirama, Tobirama, you, and I. The world is not ready for the truth of its own creation myth. I agree, Naruto said. The story of Kaguya was a burden too great for this fledgling era. The shadow is gone. That's all that matters. They walked out of the shrine together, two of the most powerful men in the world, their relationship irrevocably changed. They had not become friends in the way Naruto was with Hashirama, but they had become something perhaps more vital, true allies, bound by a shared, world-altering secret. The following days settled into a strange new normal. With the threat of Zetsu eliminated before it could truly begin, the future felt like a vast, uncharted territory. For Naruto, this newfound peace was more disorienting than any battle. His life's purpose, to fix a broken future, was complete. Now, he had to build a life of his own, and he quickly discovered that navigating the politics of peace was a minefield far more treacherous than any battlefield. The marriage proposals from Hashirama and Madara hung over the village's leadership like an unspoken storm cloud. Naruto found himself the subject of intense, albeit subtle, scrutiny. Senju elders would greet him with newfound warmth, inquiring about his health and well-being with a pointed, familial concern. Uchiha police force members would offer him crisp, formal salutes that held a flicker of possessive pride. He was no longer just the guardian sage, he was Konoha's most eligible, and most strategic, bachelor. He tried to avoid both Toka and Satsuki, a feat that was nearly impossible in the close-knit community of the village's elite. When he inevitably crossed paths with Toka near the mission assignment desk, her usual sharp wit was honed to a razor's edge. "Good morning, guardian sage," she greeted him, a dangerous sparkle in her eyes. "I trust you're having a pleasant day, considering my nephew is attempting to auction you off like a prize bull." "Toka, Naruto began, feeling his face flush. "Save it," she cut him off, though her lips quirked into a smirk. "I know it wasn't your idea. Hashirama's subtlety has all the grace of his wood golems. Just know that I am not a political bargaining chip. And if my nephew thinks he can plan my life for me, he's in for a very rude awakening." She gave him a look that was both a warning and a promise, before turning and walking away, leaving him feeling thoroughly flustered. His encounter with Satsuki was quieter, but no less intense. He found her overseeing a training session for new police force recruits, her movements precise and commanding. She dismissed the recruits as he approached, her expression as unreadable as ever. "Naruto-sama," she greeted him with a formal bow. "Satsuki, please, just Naruto," he sighed. "My cousin has placed you in an untenable position," she stated, getting straight to the point in her typical Uchiha fashion. "He sees your union with our clan as a logical step to secure our future. His motives are for the good of the village." "And what do you see?" Naruto asked, genuinely curious. Satsuki was silent for a moment, her dark eyes studying him. "I see a man who speaks of connection, not control. And I see a mission that I must fulfill for the honor of my clan." Her gaze was unwavering, but Naruto sensed the conflict within her words. She was a woman torn between a lifetime of duty and a new, compelling philosophy. "Whatever the outcome, I will perform my duty as expected." It was an answer that was both perfectly loyal and deeply unsatisfying. Naruto realized he couldn't keep running. He was a man who faced his problems head-on. It was time to deal with this one. He didn't call a meeting in the Hokage Tower. That was their battlefield, the place of politics and posturing. He chose his own ground. He sent a simple message to both Toka and Satsuki, asking them to meet him that evening at a small, new restaurant that had recently opened near the edge of the village. It was a simple ramen stand, run by a kind man whose young son, a boy of about 10 named Tucci and a new student at the academy Toburama had established, helped him at the counter. It was the first Ichiraku ramen. He was there first, sitting at the counter, a steaming bowl of miso pork ramen before him. Toka arrived first, her expression wary but curious. Satsuki followed a moment later, her posture as poised as ever, but her eyes betraying her surprise at the humble location. "A ramen stand?" Toka asked, sliding onto the stool next to him. "This is your idea of a clandestine meeting?" "It's the most honest place in the village," Naruto said with a smile. "No politics, no posturing. Just good food." He gestured for them to order. "My treat." They ate in a surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes, the savory warmth of the broth seeming to melt away some of the tension. Finally, Naruto put down his chopsticks. "I asked you both here because I wanted to apologize," he began. "For the position Hashirama and Madara have put you in. And to make one thing perfectly clear." He looked from Toka's sharp, intelligent face to Satsuki's calm, proud one. "I will not be a pawn in their political games." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Toka, you are one of the fiercest, smartest people I have ever met. You are a pillar of this village, a master of your art, and a friend. Your value is your own, not as an extension of the Senju clan's influence." Toka's eyes widened slightly, her usual smirk softened by his genuine words. He then turned to Satsuki. And Satsuki, you are the future of the Uchiha. You are a leader, a brilliant shinobi, and a woman with a deep sense of honor. Your worth is not defined by who you marry, but by the strength of your own will. He looked at both of them. I am honored that my friends think so highly of me, and of you. But a marriage, a family. That's not something that can be built on a foundation of political strategy. It has to be built on trust, respect, and a genuine connection. It has to be a choice. Freely made. He took a deep breath, his gaze direct and unwavering. Which is why I'm taking the choice out of their hands and putting it into ours. The air in the small ramen stand suddenly felt charged. I value the friendships I am building with both of you more than any political alliance, Naruto continued, his voice steady. But I won't deny that. I'm interested in seeing where those friendships could lead. With both of you. He felt a blush creep up his neck, but he pushed on. So, I'm proposing a different path. No arrangements, no duties. Let's just start. Let's get to know each other, outside of missions and council meetings. Let's see if there's something real there. We can date. All three of us. And see where it takes us. Toka stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, her usual witty retort completely absent. For the first time since he'd met her, she seemed genuinely speechless. Satsuki's stoic composure cracked, her eyes widening in surprise, a faint pink dusting her cheeks. The Uchiha captain, who could face down a charging army, was flustered by a simple, honest invitation. You want to date? Both of us? Toka finally managed, her voice a mixture of disbelief and intrigued amusement. Yes, Naruto said simply. You are both incredible people. And I'd like the chance to know you better. If you're willing. No pressure. No expectations. Just a choice. Satsuki looked down at her untouched bowl of ramen, then back up at Naruto, a slow, thoughtful smile forming on her lips. Your philosophy of connection. You continue to find new ways to apply it. Her voice was soft, but it held a note of genuine warmth he had never heard before. Toka recovered her composure, a slow, dangerous, and utterly thrilling smile spreading across her face. Well, just Naruto, she purred, leaning forward on the counter. I have to admit, that is the most interesting proposal I've received all week. She looked at Satsuki, a silent question passing between them. The Uchiha captain met her gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. A new alliance had just been formed, right here, over 3 bowls of ramen. But it was no longer just a political one. All right, Toka said, her eyes sparkling with a competitive fire that was now aimed at a very different kind of prize. Let's go tell our clan leaders that we'll be handling our own social arrangements from now on. They walked to the Hokage Tower together, no longer as representatives of their clans, but as a unified, and very complicated, force. They found Hashirama and Madara in the middle of a heated debate over the placement of a new training ground. Hashirama. Madara, Naruto began, his voice calm and firm, drawing their immediate attention. We have come to a decision regarding your proposals. Toka stepped forward. We have decided that the matter of the guardian sage's personal life is, in fact, a personal one. Satsuki stepped forward beside her. And we have agreed to his proposal to explore the matter personally, without the interference of clan politics. Naruto stood between them, a quiet pillar of strength. What she means is, stop trying to set me up. We'll handle it. Hashirama and Madara stared, stunned into silence. They had been so focused on their own political chess match that they had failed to realize the pieces had just rewritten the rules of the game. Hashirama looked from Naruto to his aunt Satsuki, a look of utter, bewildered confusion on his face. Madara simply gave a curt, almost impressed nod. They had been outmaneuvered. The political crisis was averted, replaced by something far more complex and intriguing. The future of Naruto's heart was now his own to decide, and the path forward was clear, open, and filled with the tantalizing possibilities of a peace they had all fought so hard to build. The weight of a quiet day. The confrontation in the Hokage Tower was a quiet coup, a revolution fought not with blades but with an unassailable, united will. Hashirama, for the first time in his adult life, was rendered utterly speechless by his aunt, his well-meaning plan dismantled with surgical precision. Madara, a man who could face down an army without flinching, found himself on the receiving end of a glare from his cousin so cold and disappointed that it was more effective than any genjutsu. They had been outmaneuvered, not by a rival clan, but by the very people they sought to control, and the result was a profound and immediate shift in the village's internal power structure. The formal marriage proposals were withdrawn. The incident, which came to be known wryly among the 4 founders as the Ramen Summit, established a new, unspoken truth. Naruto, Toka, and Satsuki were a political entity unto themselves. Their loyalty was to the village and to each other, a bond that transcended clan politics. For Naruto, it was a liberating victory. The path of his personal life was now his own to walk, free from the machinations of his powerful friends. He had not anticipated, however, how complicated that path would be. With the world pacified and the last great shadow vanquished, Konoha settled into the mundane, challenging work of being a nation. The days were filled not with battles, but with budgets, not with ambushes, but with trade agreements. For warriors forged in a lifetime of conflict, the quiet was a strange and sometimes unsettling adjustment. Naruto found his role as guardian sage shifting. He was less a deterrent and more a symbol. He spent his days mediating disputes between the burgeoning clans, arguments over lumber rights between the Sarutobi and the Nara, or water access between the Akimichi and the Hyuga. He would listen patiently, his sage senses allowing him to feel the truth beneath the grievances, and offer simple, common-sense solutions that left both parties feeling respected. He was becoming the village's heart, the calm center around which the fractious clans learned to orbit. It was during these quiet days that his relationships with Toka and Satsuki began to evolve beyond the camaraderie of their shared mission. They were no longer just allies, they were friends, and their friendship was a complex, three-way dance of respect, challenge, and a deep, unspoken curiosity. Toka, true to her nature, was the most direct. She found him one afternoon overseeing the construction of the new Shinobi Academy, a project Hashirama had poured his heart into. "Watching children play with mud pies, guardian sage?" she asked, her voice a familiar, teasing melody as she leaned against a newly erected wall. "A thrilling use of your godlike power. The foundation has to be strong," Naruto replied with a smile, watching a group of Senju and Uchiha children working together to build a small, lopsided fortress. "This is the most important thing we'll ever build." "Sentimental," Toka scoffed, though her eyes were soft as she watched the children. She turned her sharp gaze back to him. "You've been avoiding me, Naruto." "I have not," he protested, perhaps a little too quickly. "You have," she insisted, pushing off the wall and walking closer. "Ever since the ramen summit. You think because you made your grand declaration, the conversation is over. You were wrong." She stopped in front of him, her presence a potent mixture of confidence and challenge. "You said a partnership has to be a choice. I agree. So, I'm making one. I choose to get to know the man who lectures Kijis and hides in ramen stands. And I'm not going to do it in a stuffy office or on a battlefield." Her lips curved into a dangerous smirk. "Tonight. The Cross Staves Tavern in the Merchants District. We're going to have a real conversation. And a drinking contest. Don't be late." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her confident stride leaving no room for argument. Naruto stared after her, a feeling of mingled dread and excitement bubbling in his chest. "She's terrifying," he muttered to himself. "Yes, she is," Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind. "You should go. It will be amusing to watch you make a fool of yourself." Satsuki's approach was, as always, more subtle. She sought him out 2 days later, not in public, but at the small, quiet training ground he had adopted as his own personal sanctuary. She appeared as a silent shadow, her Uchiha police force uniform immaculate. "Naruto," she began, her voice calm and formal, though he could sense the faint nervousness beneath the surface. "I require your assistance with a delicate matter." "Official business?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his brow after a training session. "In a manner of speaking," she replied. She explained that a series of minor, seemingly unrelated thefts had occurred within the Uchiha district. Food, blankets, medical supplies. Nothing of great value, but the pattern was meticulous, the thief leaving no trace that even the Sharingan could follow. "It is a matter of pride for the police force. We cannot solve it, and my cousin Madara is displeased." "You want me to use my sage senses to find the thief," Naruto surmised. "I want your perspective," Satsuki corrected gently. "You see things others miss. You see the connections." They spent the afternoon walking through the Uchiha district, a place of clean lines, disciplined order, and quiet pride. As they investigated the scenes of the thefts, Satsuki laid out the facts with the precision of a master detective. Naruto, however, wasn't looking at the evidence. He was feeling the emotions left behind. He felt the faint echoes of desperation, of fear, but most surprisingly, of shame. "The thief isn't an outsider," Naruto said finally, as they stood in a quiet alleyway. "And they're not stealing out of greed. They're stealing out of need. And they're ashamed of it." He closed his eyes, focusing. "It's a family. Uchiha. Their son was crippled in one of the last skirmishes before the truce. His medical costs. Their pride won't let them ask for aid from the clan, so the mother has been taking what they need to survive. Satsuki stared at him, her analytical mind stunned by the simple, emotional truth he had uncovered, a truth that all her logic and visual prowess had missed. How? You look for clues, Naruto explained softly. I listen for heartbeats. He looked at her. What will you do? My duty is to enforce the law, she said, her voice wavering almost imperceptibly. Theft is a crime. Is it? Naruto countered. Or is a village that allows one of its own to suffer in silence the greater crime? He met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a deep, unwavering empathy. The law is a tool, Satsuki. Like a kunai. You can use it to punish, or you can use it to cut someone free from a trap. The choice is yours. Satsuki was silent for a long time. She looked at the proud, unbending crest of her clan on her uniform, then at the kind, understanding face of the man beside her. I will speak to the family, she said finally, her voice soft. I will ensure they are provided for. Anonymously. The official report will state the case remains unsolved. She had made a choice. Not as an Uchiha, but as a person. In the quiet alley, a new, deeper connection was forged between them, a bond built not on politics or power, but on a shared moment of compassion. That evening, Naruto sat atop the Hokage monument, looking down at the twinkling lights of his village. He thought of Toka's fiery challenge and Satsuki's quiet strength. His life was no longer a race against a dark future, but a slow, complicated, and utterly fascinating exploration of a peaceful present. The path ahead was no longer a battlefield, but a different kind of uncharted territory, one with no maps and no clear objective other than navigating the complex, exhilarating, and terrifying landscape of the human heart. He had faced down gods and monsters, but the prospect of a drinking contest with Toka Senju and a quiet conversation with Satsuki Uchiha felt infinitely more daunting. A slow grin spread across his face. For the first time in his life, he had no idea what was coming next, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The quiet days had begun, and they promised to be the greatest adventure of all. The art of a new beginning. The Cross Staves Tavern was everything Naruto had expected and nothing he was prepared for. It was loud, crowded, and smelled of spilled sake, roasting meat, and the damp wool of shinobi cloaks. It was the kind of place where off-duty shinobi came to forget the rigors of their lives, to gamble, to boast, and to drink. It was, in short, Toka Senju's natural habitat. She was already there when he arrived, seated at a secluded table in the back, a small flask of sake already before her. She looked different from the armored diplomat or the focused kunoichi. Dressed in a simple but elegant dark blue kimono, her long hair unbound, she looked relaxed, dangerous, and utterly captivating. She saw him hesitating at the door and a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Don't just stand there gawking, guardian sage, she called out, her voice easily cutting through the tavern's din. Or are you afraid you can't handle a real drink? The challenge was set. Naruto took a deep breath, muttered this is a terrible idea to himself, and walked over. I can handle a drink, he said, taking the seat opposite her. We'll see, Toka purred, flagging down a server. 2 large flasks of the house special. The strong stuff. She turned her sharp eyes back to Naruto. The rules are simple. We drink, and we talk. No titles, no politics. Just you and me. And the first one to fall off their stool loses. What followed was an evening unlike any Naruto had ever experienced. The sake was strong, burning a path down his throat, but his Uzumaki vitality and Kurama's chakra worked to metabolize the alcohol with frustrating efficiency. The drinking contest quickly became a backdrop for the real battle, a duel of wits. Toka was relentless. She asked him about his travels, not the grand battles, but the small details. The taste of the food in the land of wind, the sound of the mist in the land of water. She poked and prodded at his carefully constructed walls, trying to find the man behind the legend. So, you told my grandniece you were a friend of the Nine Tails, she said, refilling his cup. What's he like? Does he enjoy long walks on the beach? Does he have hobbies? He's a grumpy, cynical furball who thinks everyone is an idiot, Naruto replied honestly, taking a long drink. He complains a lot. But he's loyal. He's had my back more times than I can count. So you're the optimist and he's the pessimist, Toka mused. You balance each other. I can appreciate that. She leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with mischief. What does he think of me? Kurama's voice instantly rumbled in his mind. Tell her she's a loud, manipulative woman who is a terrible influence on you. Naruto choked on his sake. He, thinks you're formidable, he managed to say, earning a deep, rumbling chuckle from the fox. Toka laughed, a full, throaty sound that turned heads. A diplomatic answer. You're learning. As the night wore on and the flasks emptied, the teasing questions gave way to something more. Toka spoke of her own past, of growing up as a woman in the hypermasculine world of the Senju clan, of having to be twice as strong, twice as smart, just to be considered an equal. She spoke of the brothers she had lost to the war with the Uchiha, a pain that still lingered beneath her confident exterior. Naruto, in turn, found himself speaking of things he had never told anyone. He spoke of the loneliness of his own childhood, of the ache of being an orphan, of the constant weight of a destiny he never asked for. He didn't speak of the future he came from, but he spoke of the emotions that had forged him, and Toka listened, her sharp gaze softening with an empathy he hadn't expected. You know, she said, her voice quiet now, her cheeks flushed from the sake, for a man who can level mountains, you carry a lot of sadness in your eyes. She reached across the table, her fingers gently brushing against his. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that had nothing to do with the alcohol. You don't have to carry it alone. The moment was broken by a loud crash from the other side of the tavern as a gambling dispute turned violent. Toka sighed, withdrawing her hand. And there's our cue. The piece is still a rowdy beast. She stood, her movements surprisingly steady. For the record, guardian sage, she said, a genuine smile on her face, you're not a bad drinking partner. As he walked her back towards the Senju district through the quiet, moonlit streets, Naruto realized he had lost the drinking contest. His head was definitely spinning, but he felt like he had won something far more valuable. 2 days later, Satsuki found him at his sanctuary training ground. She was not in her uniform, but in a simple, dark purple yukata, her hair adorned with a single, elegant silver pin. She held a small, wrapped box. I trust your meeting with Toka-sama was productive, she said, her tone perfectly neutral, though Naruto could sense the faintest hint of curiosity. It was loud, Naruto replied, which made Satsuki's lips quirk in a small smile. I have come to ask for your assistance again, she said. But this time, it is not an official matter. She held out the box. This is a gift. As thanks for your help with the matter in my district. Naruto took it, surprised. Inside was a set of finely crafted shuriken, their edges perfectly balanced, the Uchiha fan crest subtly etched into the steel. Satsuki, you didn't have to. It is a matter of honor, she insisted. An Uchiha pays their debts. She paused. I also came to ask a question. About your philosophy. You speak of connection as the ultimate strength. I wish to understand this on a practical level. What do you mean? Show me, she said simply. Show me how you see the world. Intrigued, Naruto agreed. He led her not to a training ground or a council room, but to the bustling central market of the village. The place was a vibrant tapestry of life. Merchants haggled, children laughed, and shinobi from a dozen different clans mingled, their crests a patchwork of Konoha's new identity. The Sharingan sees chakra, Satsuki stated, her eyes scanning the crowd. It sees the flow of power, the potential for threats. It is a tool of analysis. And what do you see right now? Naruto asked. I see 100 potential conflicts, she answered honestly. A Hyuga and an Inuzuka arguing over the price of fish. A group of young Sarutobi boasting, their chakra flaring with pride. It is a chaotic system on the verge of breaking down. Okay, Naruto said. Now close your eyes. Satsuki hesitated, her shinobi instinct screaming against the idea of making herself vulnerable in a crowded place. But she looked at Naruto's calm, reassuring face, and complied. Now, he said softly, don't look. Just listen. Feel. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and using his own chakra as a conduit, he subtly expanded her senses, allowing her to feel the world as he did in sage mode. For Satsuki, it was a revelation. The world exploded. She didn't just hear the argument between the Hyuga and the Inuzuka, she felt their shared frustration at a long day, their mutual respect for each other as shinobi, and the underlying humor in their bickering. She didn't just see the Sarutobi boys' chakra, she felt their youthful pride, their desperate need for validation, their deep-seated loyalty to their new home. She felt the baker's satisfaction in a perfectly baked loaf of bread, the florist's love for her flowers, the quiet, steady heartbeat of the entire village, a single, unified rhythm of life. She felt the connections. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly opened them, overwhelmed by the sheer emotional data. The world snapped back into its sharp, analytical focus, but it was different now. She couldn't unfeel what she had just felt. That is how you see the world? She whispered, her voice filled with awe. It's a part of it, Naruto said gently. Power and conflict are real. But so is this. The connections between people. That's the real energy of the village, Satsuki. It's stronger than any jutsu. It's what we're fighting to protect. They walked in silence for a long time after that, Satsuki seeing the village not as a collection of potential threats, but as a web of interconnected lives. They ended up at the Uchiha Memorial Stone, a simple black monolith engraved with the names of the clan's war dead. My father's name is on this stone, Satsuki said, her voice barely a whisper as she traced a name with her finger. He died fighting the Senju. For years, I saw Toka's family as nothing but the enemy who took him from me. She looked at Naruto, her dark eyes holding a new, profound understanding. But her brothers' names are on a stone just like this one. They felt the same loss we did. We were so focused on the conflict between us, we never saw the connection in our shared grief. She turned to him, and in a gesture of startling vulnerability, she gently took his hand. Thank you, Naruto, she said. For showing me. Her hand was warm in his, and in the quiet reverence of the memorial ground, Naruto felt a connection forged between them, a bond of shared understanding that was as powerful and as quiet as Satsuki herself. The path ahead was still uncertain, a complex dance between a fiery Senju and a brilliant Uchiha. But as Naruto stood there, holding Satsuki's hand, he knew that the quiet days of peace, with all their daunting, exhilarating complexity, were a challenge he was more than ready to face. A tale of two dates. The ramen summit did not quiet the village gossip, it set it ablaze. The sight of the guardian sage walking through the village with Toka Senju on one side and Satsuki Uchiha on the other became a subject of intense speculation in every tea house and training ground. They were a walking paradox, a symbol of the village's unity and a source of its most fascinating drama. For Naruto, the newfound attention was a different kind of pressure. He had made a bold, honest declaration, and now he had to navigate the treacherous, uncharted territory of his own heart. True to her word, Toka did not wait for him to make the first move. She cornered him 2 days later as he was leaving the Hokage Tower, her arms crossed, a challenging smirk playing on her lips. So, guardian sage, she began, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Now that we've established that our social lives are no longer a matter for the village council, I find myself with a free evening. She gestured vaguely towards the bustling merchants district. I hear there's a festival tonight. Music, dancing, food stalls. Far too chaotic for a respectable Uchiha, I imagine. But it might be just the thing for a man who claims to enjoy the lively side of life. It wasn't a question, it was a summons. Are you asking me on a date, Toka? Naruto asked, a grin tugging at his own lips. I'm telling you that I'm going to the festival, she retorted, and that you would be a fool to miss it. She turned and began to walk away. Meet me at the main gate at sunset. Try to wear something that doesn't scream I can end the world if I feel like it. The evening was a whirlwind of vibrant chaos. The merchants' district was alive with paper lanterns, the sound of drums and flutes, and the smell of sizzling food. Toka, dressed in a stunning, deep crimson kimono that seemed to draw the light of the lanterns, led him through the throng with a practiced ease. She was in her element, a force of nature that thrived on energy and excitement. She challenged him to everything. They played games of skill at the stalls, Toka's sharp eyes and steady hand proving a match for Naruto's sage-enhanced reflexes. They sampled every kind of food, from sweet dengo to spicy squid, their laughter echoing through the crowded streets. And when the music swelled, she pulled him into the heart of the crowd and taught him the steps to a traditional festival dance, her movements fluid and graceful, a stark contrast to his own clumsy, enthusiastic attempts. For the first time, Naruto felt like just a man. He wasn't a sage, a Jinchuriki, or a political asset. He was just Naruto, a 25-year-old man laughing with a beautiful, fiery woman under a sky full of lanterns. Later, they found a quiet spot on a small bridge overlooking a stream, away from the noise of the festival. Toka leaned against the railing, her usual sharp edges softened by the warm light and the lingering effects of a shared flask of warm sake. You're not what I expected, you know, she said, her voice quiet. What did you expect? A monster, she admitted without hesitation. A weapon. That's what the stories said. That's what my nephew's fear implied. A being of overwhelming, uncontrollable power. She turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his. But you're not. You wield that power with a gentleness that's almost confusing. You fight to protect, not to conquer. You build bridges, you don't burn them. The world has enough monsters, Naruto said softly. I'd rather be something else. You are, she said, and the sincerity in her voice was a tangible thing. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the whisker-like marks on his cheeks. You carry so much pain, so much loneliness. I felt it that night in the tavern. But you don't let it make you bitter. You turn it into kindness. Her hand moved to his, her touch warm and firm. You told me I didn't have to be just a weapon for my clan. Well, you don't have to be just a guardian for the village. You're allowed to have a life, Naruto. You're allowed to be happy. In the quiet moment, under the soft glow of the paper lanterns, Naruto felt a connection with her that was as powerful and as undeniable as a force of nature. It was a bond of shared strength, of mutual respect, and the thrilling, dangerous promise of something more. Satsuki's invitation came 3 days later. It was a simple, unsigned note left at his door, written in elegant, precise calligraphy. It named a time and a place, sunset, at the quiet training ground near the Uchiha Memorial Stone. He found her there, not in a yukata, but in her practical training gear. The setting sun cast long shadows across the empty field. She stood silently, watching the sky, her posture one of quiet contemplation. Satsuki, he greeted her softly. She turned, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. Naruto. Thank you for coming. This is a very different kind of date, he commented, a hint of amusement in his voice. I am not Tokusama, she replied simply. Loud festivals and drinking contests are not my way. My way is quieter. She gestured to the training ground. I came here to ask for your help with my training. Naruto raised an eyebrow. You want me to help you train? You're one of the strongest kunoichi in the village. My strength is in precision, in analysis, she explained. My Sharingan allows me to see and deconstruct my opponent's movements. But it is reactive. You are different. You move with a flow, a connection to the world that I cannot see, only feel. I want to understand it. The date became a lesson unlike any other. It was not a spar. It was a dance. Naruto guided her through a series of exercises designed to heighten her senses beyond sight. He had her fight him blindfolded, forcing her to rely on the sound of his footsteps, the rush of air from his movements, the feel of the earth beneath her feet. At first, she was clumsy, her body lost without the perfect data of her eyes. But slowly, she began to learn. She started to anticipate his movements not by seeing them, but by feeling his intent. Her Uchiha precision began to merge with a new, fluid grace. As darkness fell, they sat on the grass, breathing heavily, a comfortable silence between them. The world is so loud, Satsuki said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. When I rely only on my eyes, everything is sharp, clear, but silent. But when I listen, I can hear everything. The heartbeat of the forest. The whisper of the wind. She looked at him, her dark eyes holding a new, profound respect. This is the connection you spoke of. It's a part of it, Naruto said. It's about understanding that you're not just a single point in the world, but a part of a larger whole. It's where true strength comes from. My clan has always sought strength through power, Satsuki said, her voice barely a whisper. Through the Mangekyo. Through control. We believe that love leads to loss, and loss leads to hatred. It is our curse. She looked at the memorial stone, its surface gleaming in the moonlight. But you have lost more than anyone, yet you have no hatred. Only a deep sadness. And an even deeper kindness. You have turned your loss into a different kind of strength. She turned back to him, and in a gesture of profound trust, she reached out and gently placed her hand on his cheek, her thumb brushing against his whisker marks. I would like to learn more about that kind of strength, Naruto. Her touch was cool and gentle, a quiet anchor in the vastness of the night. It was a connection forged not in fiery passion, but in a deep, shared understanding of pain, and the quiet, determined hope for something better. Naruto walked back to his small, empty house that night, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had spent an evening laughing and competing with a fiery, passionate Senju who challenged him to live in the moment. He had spent another in quiet contemplation with a brilliant, introspective Uchiha who challenged him to look deeper into the heart of the world. They were as different as fire and shadow, as a raging river and a still lake. And he found himself, to his own profound confusion, drawn to both. You have a problem, Kit, Kurama's voice rumbled, for once devoid of its usual sarcasm. It was a simple statement of fact. I know, Naruto sighed, running a hand through his hair. One is a storm, the other is the quiet earth, the fox continued. One will push you to be greater. The other will give you a place to rest. To build a life with one would be a challenge. To build a life with both. It is a path no one has ever walked. So what do I do? Naruto asked the empty room. For once, Kurama admitted, I have no idea. This is a battlefield of the heart, Naruto. And on this field, you are still just a Chūnin. Tread carefully. Naruto collapsed onto his bed, a weary smile on his face. The world was at peace, the great threats were gone, but he had just stumbled into the most complex and dangerous mission of his life. And for the first time, there was no prophecy to guide him, no enemy to defeat. There was no choice to be made between two paths, but rather an entirely new one to be forged. One that included a fiery Senju and a brilliant Uchiha. The prospect was terrifying, exhilarating, and felt more like home than anything he had ever known. The unforeseen path. The months following Naruto's audacious proposal at the ramen stand were a strange and wonderful time for Konoha. The village, now secure in its peace, began to truly flourish. The Shinobi Academy, under Toburama's strict but effective curriculum, produced its first class of graduates, a cohort of children from a dozen clans who saw each other not as rivals, but as comrades of the Leaf. Trade routes opened, the economy boomed, and the quiet, steady work of building a nation continued. But for the village's elite, the most fascinating spectacle was the quiet, personal drama unfolding between their guardian sage and the two most formidable women in Konoha. Naruto, true to his word, pursued a relationship with both Toka and Satsuki, and the village watched, captivated. His time with Toka was a whirlwind of fiery energy. Their dates were public, vibrant affairs. They would be seen engaging in fierce but laughing spars in the main training grounds, their taijutsu a breathtaking dance of senju power and sage unpredictability. Toka would drag him to rowdy taverns, where she would challenge him to drinking contests he always lost and arm wrestling matches he always, wisely, let her win. She pushed him, challenged him, and forced him to engage with the world in a way he never had before. She taught him to laugh freely, to argue passionately over trivial things, and to embrace the chaotic, beautiful mess of living in the moment. With Toka, Naruto felt vibrantly, thrillingly alive. His time with Satsuki was a study in quiet intimacy. Their moments were private, stolen in the quiet corners of the village. She would invite him to the Uchiha archives, where they would spend hours in comfortable silence, reading ancient scrolls. She would explain the complex history of her clan, the tragic cycle of the Sharingan, and he would listen, offering not solutions, but a quiet, empathetic understanding that she had never known. He, in turn, would speak of the Baijuu, of their loneliness and pride, and she would see the parallels to her own clan story. They would often end their evenings sitting by the memorial stone, not speaking, but simply sharing the space, their connection a deep, silent river flowing beneath the surface. With Satsuki, Naruto felt a profound sense of peace, of being understood on a level that transcended words. The village leadership watched this unfold with a mixture of fascination and bewilderment. Hashirama was ecstatic, if a little confused. "He's dating both of them?" he asked Toburama one afternoon, utterly baffled. "Is that allowed?" "There is no precedent, brother," Toburama replied, his tone dry as he reviewed a budget report. "But strategically, it is a masterstroke. By courting both a Senju and an Uchiha, he has effectively neutralized the political rivalry for his favor. Both clans feel they have a claim, and thus, neither can afford to alienate him. It has created a state of perfect, if unorthodox, political balance." Madara was more perceptive. He saw beyond the politics. He watched as his cousin, Satsuki, began to change. The hard, defensive shell she had worn her entire life began to soften. He saw a new light in her eyes, a quiet confidence that was not born of Uchiha pride, but of genuine happiness. He saw her laughing at something Toka said in the marketplace, a sound he hadn't heard from her in years. He saw the bond forming between the three of them, and while he did not fully understand it, he recognized its strength. It was the tangible proof of the connection Naruto always spoke of, and it was a more powerful foundation for the village than any treaty. For Naruto, the experience was a revelation. He found that the two women did not represent two conflicting paths, but two essential halves of a whole. Toka's fiery spirit drew him out of his shell, forcing him to engage with the joy and chaos of life. Satsuki's quiet strength gave him a place to rest, a calm harbor where he could be vulnerable and understood. They balanced him, and in turn, they balanced each other. The fierce Senju learned a measure of quiet introspection from the Uchiha, and the stoic Uchiha learned to embrace the warmth of an unrestrained laugh from the Senju. One evening, nearly a year after the ramen summit, Naruto sat alone on the Hokage monument, looking down at the village he now unequivocally called home. He thought of his life, of the loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long. And he realized, with a startling clarity, that it was gone. The hole in his heart had been filled, not by one person, but by two. The path forward, which had once seemed so terrifyingly complex, was now blindingly, beautifully simple. He knew what he had to do. He didn't send a note or ask them to meet in public. He went to their homes, separately. First, he went to the Senju compound, to the small, elegant house that Toka maintained. He found her in her garden, tending to a collection of rare, chakra-sensitive flowers. "Naruto," she said, a warm smile on her face. Come to lose another drinking contest? No, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I came to ask you a question. He took her hands, his gaze direct and filled with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. Toka Senju, you are the most brilliant, frustrating, and alive person I have ever known. You challenge me, you make me laugh, and you make me feel like the world is a place worth fighting for. My life is better, brighter, and infinitely more interesting with you in it. He took a deep breath. I know our path is unconventional. But it's our path. And I want to walk it with you. Forever. Toka stared at him, her usual sharp wit failing her. Tears welled in her eyes, and she let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. You idiot, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. What took you so long? She threw her arms around his neck, her answer a fierce, passionate kiss. Later, he went to the Uchiha district. He found Satsuki in her family's library, organizing ancient scrolls. She looked up as he entered, her expression calm, but her eyes held a knowing light. Satsuki, he began, his heart pounding a steady, confident rhythm. I need to ask you something. He walked over to her, taking the scroll from her hands and placing it on the table. He took her hands in his. You are the calm in my storm. You understand the parts of me that I can't put into words. You see the sadness I carry, and you're not afraid of it. You give me a peace I never thought I would find. He met her gaze, his own eyes shining with sincerity. I know this is not the path anyone expected. But it's the one that feels true. I want to build a life, a family, with you. Satsuki's stoic composure finally broke. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek, but her smile was radiant. My clan's curse is to find a great love, and to fear its loss, she said, her voice soft. But you have taught me that connection is not a weakness. It is the greatest strength of all. She squeezed his hands. My answer is yes, Naruto. 1,000 times, yes. That night, Naruto brought them both to the small, simple house he had finally started to build for himself on the outskirts of the village. It was not a grand estate, but a warm, welcoming home overlooking a quiet stream. He stood before them, the two pillars of his new life, his heart full to bursting. I love you both, he said, the words feeling more real and more powerful than any jutsu he had ever wielded. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to propose that we build our family together. All three of us. Toka, her eyes shining with fierce joy, stepped forward and took one of his hands. Satsuki, her face alight with a quiet, profound happiness, took the other. They stood there, a senju, an Uchiha, and a man from another time, their hands joined, their hearts united. They were not just breaking the rules, they were writing new ones. The political implications of such a union would be massive. The social shockwave would be felt throughout the village. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They had found their own peace, their own balance. And their future, a future they would build together, was just beginning. The will of fire's next flame. The 2 years that followed were a golden age for Konoha. The sage's peace held, a formidable shield that allowed the fledgling village to grow from a bold experiment into a thriving nation. The fear that had once defined the world's view of Konoha slowly gave way to a grudging respect, and then, to a cautious curiosity. Trade routes flourished, alliances were solidified, and the quiet, steady work of building a new world continued unabated. The most significant event of this era, and the one that sent the most powerful political shockwave across the continent, was the marriage of Naruto Uzumaki. It was an event that defied all tradition and precedent. He did not choose between the Senju and the Uchiha. He chose both. The wedding was a spectacle of unity unlike any seen before. It was not held in a clan compound, but in the very center of the village, under the great tree Hashirama had grown for the first summit. The ceremony was a blend of three traditions: the vibrant, seal-laden rituals of the Uzumaki, the solemn, nature-revering vows of the Senju, and the proud, firelit oaths of the Uchiha. Naruto stood between his two brides. Toka was a vision in a deep crimson kimono, her fiery spirit shining in her eyes. Satsuki, in a formal dark purple robe bearing the Uchiha crest, was a picture of serene, breathtaking grace. Hashirama, officiating the ceremony as Hokage, wept openly with joy. Madara stood as his cousin's witness, his expression impassive, but his presence a powerful statement of the Uchiha's full-throated approval. The union was not just a marriage, it was the final, unbreakable seal on the alliance that had founded the village. Life in the house by the stream became a complex, beautiful dance. Naruto found himself navigating a world he was utterly unprepared for. Toka filled their home with laughter, debate, and a chaotic, vibrant energy. She would challenge him on everything, from his training regimen to his taste in tea, her sharp intellect keeping him constantly on his toes. Satsuki, in contrast, brought a quiet, steady peace. She organized their lives with a calm efficiency, creating a sanctuary of order and tranquility. She would engage him in deep, thoughtful conversations that lasted late into the night, her insightful questions helping him to understand his own heart. They were fire and shadow, storm and stillness. And together, they created a perfect balance. The two women, once rivals, forged a bond of their own, a deep and powerful sisterhood built on their shared love for Naruto and their mutual respect for each other's strength. Their home became a symbol of the village itself, a place where a Senju and an Uchiha could live not just in peace, but in genuine, familial affection. The first joy came just under a year after the wedding. It was Toka. Her pregnancy was as energetic and as full of life as she was, and it sent Hashirama into a fit of ecstatic, grandfatherly fussing that drove the entire Senju clan to distraction. 9 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a shock of bright, sun-yellow hair and his mother's sharp, intelligent eyes. They named him Minato. 6 months after that, Satsuki announced her own pregnancy. Hers was a quieter, more contemplative journey, and she spent much of her time in the library, reading stories to her unborn child. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl with her father's bright blue eyes and a dusting of dark Uchiha hair. They named her Kushina. Naruto, the man who had been alone for so long, was now a husband and a father. Holding his son, and then his daughter, was a feeling more profound and more powerful than any sage mode or Baijuu cloak. He had found his roots. He had built a family. The lonely ghost from the future was gone, replaced by a man who was, for the first time, truly, completely home. Naruto, now 27, walked through the bustling streets of Konoha, a contented smile on his face. The village was a testament to the peace he had helped build. He was on his way to the Hokage Tower, summoned by a formal message from Hashirama. The urgency was unusual for these quiet times, and it piqued his curiosity. He entered the office to find his friend looking not exhausted by paperwork, but energized, a familiar, brilliant spark in his eyes. Naruto. Excellent, you're here, Hashirama boomed, gesturing for him to sit. I have a new mission for you. Perhaps the most important one you've ever undertaken for this village. Naruto raised an eyebrow. More important than ending a world war? Infinitely more important, Hashirama said, his expression turning serious. The first class of the Shinobi Academy has graduated. These are the first true shinobi of the Leaf, children of a dozen clans who have trained together, who see the will of fire as their primary loyalty. They are the future. And their first sensei, their first guides in the world, will shape that future for generations to come. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on his desk. I have chosen the Jonin who will lead the first 3 Jonin teams. I am one. Madara has agreed to lead another. And I want you, our guardian sage, to lead the third. Naruto was stunned. A Jonin sensei? After everything, his new mission was to go back to the very beginning. Me? He asked. Hashirama, I'm not a teacher. You are the best teacher we have, Hashirama countered firmly. You taught Tobirama to see beyond his logic. You taught Madara the value of trust. You taught me how to control my power. You don't just teach jutsu, Naruto. You teach the heart. And that is what this new generation needs most. Before Naruto could protest further, Hashirama slid 3 files across the desk. This will be your team. I chose them specifically for you. A balance of clan legacy and raw potential. Naruto picked up the first file. Hiruzen Sarutobi. Son of the Sarutobi clan head. A prodigy said to have already mastered many of his clan's advanced fire jutsu. Naruto felt a jolt of recognition, a wave of fond memory. The kind, wise old man who had been a grandfather to him. To see him as a boy. He opened the second file. Danzo Shimura. A boy from a lesser-known but fiercely proud clan, known for his intense ambition and a competitive spirit that rivaled even the Uchiha. The name sent a chill down Naruto's spine, a ghost of a different, darker future. A future he had prevented. A future he would ensure never came to pass. He opened the third file. Tuchi Ichiraku. A civilian-born boy, son of the man who ran the ramen stand. He had no clan, no Kekkei Genkai, but had graduated from the academy through sheer grit and determination, his dream to become a great shinobi to protect the village that had given his family a home. Naruto looked at the 3 files, a slow, wide grin spreading across his face. A prodigy, a zealot, and a boy with a dream. A team that was a perfect microcosm of the village itself. He thought of the irony, the beautiful, impossible loop of history he was now a part of. He, Naruto Uzumaki, would be the sensei to the man who would one day be his Hokage, the man he had looked up to as a grandfather. Well? Hashirama asked, his hope evident. Naruto looked up, his blue eyes shining with a new sense of purpose, of excitement. The quiet days were over. A new adventure, and perhaps his most important one, was about to begin. I accept, he said. When do I meet my team? Chapter 11, The First Bell Test. The morning sun cast long shadows across the village as Naruto prepared for his new mission. In the kitchen of their home, the atmosphere was a familiar, chaotic blend of domestic peace. Toka, with 1-year-old Minato balanced expertly on her hip, was trying to simultaneously drink her tea and prevent her son from grabbing the hot flask. Satsuki, her movements serene and efficient, was coaxing a spoonful of rice porridge into 6-month-old Kushina, who was currently more interested in her father's bright yellow hair. So, the great guardian sage, the man who ended a war, is off to play teacher to a group of children, Toka said, a teasing glint in her eyes as she looked at Naruto. Are you sure you're prepared for a mission of such magnitude? It's the most dangerous one I've ever had, Naruto replied with a mock-serious expression, expertly dodging a small hand reaching for his face. Kijis and Baijuu are easy. 12-year-olds are terrifying. Satsuki looked up, a soft, rare smile on her face. They are the future of the village you built. There is no one better to guide them. She met his eyes, her gaze conveying a quiet, absolute faith that was more fortifying than any armor. Teach them well. He kissed his wives and his children goodbye, a simple act of domesticity that still filled him with a profound sense of wonder. As he walked towards the designated meeting point, the weight of his new responsibility settled upon him. It was one thing to save the world, to change the course of history. It was another thing entirely to be responsible for the hearts and minds of 3 young boys who represented that world's future. He arrived at Training Ground 7 early. The place was a perfect echo of the one he knew, with its 3 wooden posts and the quiet stream running nearby. He suppressed his presence completely, melting into the shadows of a large oak tree to observe his new students. The first to arrive was a boy with a confident swagger and sharp, intelligent eyes. He had a mop of spiky brown hair and wore the standard gear of the Sarutobi clan. Hiruzen Sarutobi. He didn't sit or wait patiently. He immediately began a series of warm-up exercises, his movements crisp and precise, a clear prodigy who was eager to prove his skill. The second boy was his opposite. He moved with a coiled, predatory stillness, his dark eyes scanning the training ground for threats. His posture was rigid, his ambition a palpable aura around him. Danzo Shimura. He ignored Hiruzen completely, his focus entirely on his surroundings, his hand never straying far from the kunai pouch on his leg. The last to arrive was a boy who seemed slightly out of place. He was smaller than the other 2, his expression a mixture of awe and nervous determination. He looked at the 2 clan children with a hint of intimidation, but his eyes held a stubborn, fiery spark. Tuchi Ichiraku. He gave a hesitant nod to the other 2, which was pointedly ignored by Danzo and met with an indifferent glance from Hiruzen. Dejected but undeterred, Tuchi began practicing his own simple katas, his form less refined but filled with a dogged effort that Naruto found instantly familiar. Naruto watched them for a full hour as they waited, observing their dynamic, or lack thereof. Hiruzen was confident in his solitary strength. Danzo was suspicious of everyone. Tuchi was desperate for a connection. They weren't a team, they were 3 separate, competing points of energy. Deciding they had waited long enough, Naruto made his entrance. He didn't use a flashy jutsu. He simply appeared, leaning against one of the wooden posts as if he had been there all along, an open book in his hands. The 3 boys started, their heads snapping towards him. You're late. Hiruzen accused, his prodigy's pride offended by the lack of punctuality. Sorry, Naruto said, not looking up from his book. A black cat crossed my path, so I had to take the long way. Danzo's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp and analytical. Naruto Uzumaki. Why is the guardian sage personally administering a Chūnin test? Naruto finally closed his book with a soft snap and looked at them, his blue eyes calm and assessing. Indeed, my name is Naruto Uzumaki. And as of today, I'm your Jonin sensei. He gave them a wide, disarming grin. Now that introductions are out of the way, let's get down to business. Your final graduation test. He held up 2 small, silver bells that chimed softly in the breeze. Your mission is simple. You have until noon to take these bells from me. Those who succeed will officially become Chūnin. Those who fail will be sent back to the academy. Hiruzen smirked. There are 3 of us, and only 2 bells. Exactly, Naruto said, his grin widening. Which means at least one of you is guaranteed to fail. A perfect incentive to take this seriously, don't you think? He tied the bells to his belt. You may use any and all of your skills. Come at me with the intent to kill. Otherwise, you won't stand a chance. He looked at the clock on a nearby post. You may begin. Now. In a flash, the three boys disappeared into the trees. A good start. They understood the basics of stealth. Hiding is a valid strategy, Naruto called out to the empty clearing. But it won't get you these bells. The first attack came from Hiraishin. It was a textbook ambush. Fire style, great fireball jutsu. A massive orb of flame erupted from the trees, aimed directly at Naruto. At the same time, from a different angle, a volley of perfectly aimed shuriken shot towards him. A classic pincer attack, designed to force an opponent to dodge one attack directly into the path of another. Naruto didn't move. He simply raised his hand, and the shuriken stopped in mid-air, inches from his face, held by an invisible force. He then took a deep breath and blew, a simple, unamplified puff of air. A small, precise gust of wind met the great fireball, not overpowering it, but peeling it apart like an onion, causing the massive jutsu to dissipate into harmless, warm air. Hiraishin stared from his hiding place, his jaw slack. His perfect ambush, a combination that had defeated every instructor at the academy, had been dismantled without effort. The next attack was from Danzo. He was direct, brutal. He burst from the undergrowth, a kunai in each hand, his speed impressive. He didn't aim for the bells, he aimed for Naruto's throat. Naruto sighed. He sidestepped the lunge, his movement fluid and unhurried. He caught Danzo's wrist, redirecting the boy's momentum, and used it to spin him around, ending with a gentle but firm chop to the back of his neck. Danzo collapsed, his body temporarily paralyzed by a perfectly applied nerve strike. Attacking with killing intent is good, Naruto said, looking down at the furious, immobilized boy. But blind aggression is just a tantrum. He then felt a presence behind him. Tucci. The boy wasn't attacking. He had used a simple transformation jutsu to disguise himself as a log, and had been slowly, painstakingly, inching his way closer while the other two launched their flashy attacks. Naruto turned, a genuine smile on his face. That's a good idea, Tucci. Using the chaos created by your teammates as cover. But. He pointed to the ground. Tucci looked down and saw that he had left a faint, but obvious, trail in the dirt. Your execution needs work. The test continued like this for another hour. Hiraishin tried more complex jutsu, only to have Naruto counter them with simpler, more fundamental principles. Danzo, recovering from the nerve strike, tried traps and feints, only to find Naruto 3 steps ahead of him. Tucci, to his credit, kept trying to work with the others, attempting to coordinate their attacks, but Hiraishin was too proud to listen and Danzo was too suspicious to cooperate. Finally, at noon, a bell rang through the training ground. The 3 boys gathered before Naruto, panting, covered in dirt, and utterly defeated. The bells on his belt remained untouched. Well, Naruto said, his tone cheerful. That was a complete and utter failure. You're all going back to the academy. What? Hiraishin exclaimed. But I'm the top of the class. My jutsu are perfect. Your jutsu are fine, Naruto corrected. But you're not a shinobi. None of you are. He looked at each of them in turn. Hiraishin, you're so confident in your own talent that you never once considered asking for help. Danzo, you're so consumed with rivalry and suspicion that you saw your teammates as obstacles, not assets. And Tucci, he gave the boy a kind look, you understood the goal, but you lacked the strength to convince these 2 stubborn fools to listen to you. He pointed to the memorial stone in the distance, the one that would one day be filled with the names of heroes. Do you know what that stone represents? It honors the shinobi who gave their lives for this village. For their comrades. He looked back at them, his expression now hard as stone. In the shinobi world, those who break the rules are scum. That's true. But those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. The words, the same ones Obito had spoken to Kakashi, the same ones Kakashi had spoken to him, hung in the air with a profound weight. The point of this test was never about your individual skill, Naruto continued. It was about whether 3 people with different strengths and weaknesses could come together to overcome an impossible obstacle. It was about teamwork, he sighed dramatically. But I guess that was too much to ask. Oh well. Lunchtime. He pulled out a bento box and began to eat, completely ignoring them. The 3 boys stood in stunned silence, his words echoing in their minds. It was Tucci who spoke first. He's right, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I tried to tell you. We should have worked together. Hiraishin looked at the ground, his pride wounded but his intelligent mind processing the truth of Naruto's words. Danzo just scowled, but he didn't argue. He said. Those who fail go back to the academy, Tucci continued. But he also said the test was to get a bell. He never said we couldn't try again. He looked at the other two, a desperate fire in his eyes. One more time. Together. Hiruzen looked at Danzo. The rivalry between them was a palpable thing. But for the first time, he saw not just a competitor, but a potential partner. He gave a curt nod. Danzo, seeing Hiruzen's concession, grunted in what could have been agreement. Naruto watched them out of the corner of his eye, a hidden smile on his face as they began to whisper, to plan, to finally work as a team. The real test was about to begin. The strength of 3. Naruto watched from his seat on the grass, munching casually on a rice ball from his bento box. Outwardly, he appeared relaxed, almost bored. Inwardly, he was a coiled spring of attention, his sage senses tracking the hushed, frantic conversation between the 3 boys huddled in the bushes. The air, which had been thick with individual pride and suspicion, now hummed with a new, fragile energy, the energy of cooperation. He's too fast and too strong, Hiruzen's voice was a low, frustrated whisper. None of my jutsu can touch him. He sees everything. Direct assault is pointless, Danzo conceded, his voice sharp with grudging respect. He neutralized me without effort. His taijutsu is on another level entirely. He's not fighting us, he's dissecting us. So we can't beat him, Tucci said, his voice the anchor of their small group. Not alone. But maybe we don't have to beat him. We just have to get the bells. He looked at the other two, his eyes burning with a desperate sincerity. He said the test was about teamwork. So let's be a team. What are your best skills? Hiruzen, his pride finally taking a backseat to his sharp intellect, answered first. I have the most raw power. My fireball jutsu is the largest. I can create a big enough distraction to draw his full attention. I'm the fastest, Danzo stated, his gaze calculating. And I'm best with traps. I can use the distraction to set up a snare, force him into a specific position. And Tucci hesitated for a moment, then firmed his resolve. I'm the one he'll underestimate. While he's dealing with your fire and your traps, I'll be the one to go for the bells. A plan, simple but effective, was born from the ashes of their failure. It was a classic shinobi strategy, a diversion, a trap, and a targeted strike. But for these 3 boys, it was a revolutionary act. It was the first time they had ever combined their strengths. Naruto finished his rice ball and stood up, dusting off his pants. Time's almost up, boys. Ready to admit defeat? He called out, a taunting grin on his face. His answer came in the form of a roar. Fire style, great dragon flame jutsu. Hiruzen erupted from the trees, but this time it wasn't a simple fireball. It was a massive, serpentine dragon of pure flame that twisted through the air, its target not Naruto, but the entire area around him. It was a jutsu designed to scorch the earth, to limit his movement and obscure his vision with smoke and heat. Naruto's grin widened. Impressive. He's using his power not just to attack, but to control the battlefield. As Naruto moved to intercept the dragon, he felt a subtle shift in the ground beneath his feet. He glanced down and saw the faint shimmer of chakra threads connected to a series of explosive tags, perfectly hidden beneath the leaves. Danzo's trap. It was designed to detonate the moment he landed from dodging the fire dragon. Clever, Naruto murmured. He didn't dodge. Instead, he stomped his foot on the ground. Earth-style, mobile core. A single pillar of rock shot up beneath him, lifting him high above the fire dragon and the explosive trap. But the attack wasn't over. As he stood atop the pillar, Danzo appeared from behind a tree, his hands flashing through seals. Wind style, great breakthrough. A powerful gust of wind slammed into Naruto, designed to throw him off balance and send him tumbling down into the very trap he had just avoided. It was a well-executed, multi-layered assault. It was the kind of teamwork that could overwhelm a seasoned jonin. But Naruto was not a seasoned jonin. Not bad, he said, his voice calm amidst the roaring wind. He held up a single hand, and a small, dense sphere of rotating chakra appeared in his palm, a Rasengan. He didn't throw it. He simply let it spin, its power creating a vortex that absorbed and dissipated Danzo's wind attack completely. From his vantage point, he saw the final piece of their plan go into motion. While Hiruzen maintained his fire dragon and Danzo kept him pinned with smaller wind jutsu, a log that had been lying near the stream suddenly puffed into smoke. It was Tucci. He had used the chaos, the smoke, and Naruto's focus on the 2 larger threats to inch his way forward, completely unnoticed. He was a blur of motion, his hand outstretched, his fingers just inches from the bells on Naruto's belt. It was a perfect plan. It should have worked. Naruto smiled. And then he vanished. He reappeared behind Tucci in a flash of yellow light, his hand gently resting on the boy's head. Tucci froze, his eyes wide with shock, his fingers brushing against empty air. "You were close," Naruto said softly, his voice filled with genuine pride. "Really close. Your plan was excellent." The fire dragon dissipated. The wind stopped. Hiruzen and Danzo emerged from the trees, their expressions a mixture of frustration and disbelief. They had worked together, they had executed their plan perfectly, and they had still failed. We lost," Hiruzen breathed, slumping to his knees in exhaustion. "Did you?" Naruto asked, walking back to the center of the clearing. He looked at the three of them, at their dirty, exhausted, but now united faces. He saw the flicker of understanding, the shared experience of their combined effort. He reached down to his belt and, with a soft jingle, untied the two silver bells. He tossed one to Hiruzen, who caught it with a look of stunned confusion. He tossed the second to Danzo, who stared at it as if it were a foreign object. Tucci looked down, his face a mask of disappointment. He had failed. He was the one who would be sent back. "But, Sensei," Tucci began, his voice trembling slightly. "There are only two bells. I didn't get one." "That's right," Naruto said. He then turned to Hiruzen and Danzo. "So, what are you two going to do about that?" The two clan boys looked at each other, then at the bells in their hands, then at their crestfallen teammate. The lesson Naruto had been trying to teach them, the one about abandoning their comrades, slammed into them with the force of a physical blow. Hiruzen didn't hesitate. He stood up, walked over to Tucci, and held out his bell. "Here," he said, his voice firm. "You were the core of the plan. You were the one who got closest. You earned this." Before Tucci could react, Danzo stepped forward, his expression a mask of grudging respect. He, too, held out his bell. The mission was to acquire the bells for the team. The objective has been met. Who holds them is irrelevant. Tucci stared at the two bells being offered to him, his eyes welling up with tears. He looked from Hiruzen's earnest face to Danzo's stoic one. They weren't just giving him a bell. They were accepting him as one of their own. Naruto watched, a wide, proud grin spreading across his face. He let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed through the training ground. "Congratulations," he declared, his voice filled with warmth. "You all pass." The three boys stared at him, utterly bewildered. "But the rules," Hiruzen stammered. "You said only two could pass." "The rules were a lie," Naruto said with a shrug. "The real test wasn't about the bells. It was about whether you could see past them. Whether you could prioritize your comrades over the mission's objective." He looked at Hiruzen and Danzo. "When you were willing to sacrifice your own success for your teammate. That's when you truly became shinobi of the leaf." He walked over and ruffled Tucci's hair. "And you, Tucci. You may not have the raw power of these two, but you have the heart of a true shinobi. You were the one who brought them together. Never forget that that is a strength all its own." A new day was dawning in Konoha. On a quiet training ground, three boys who had started the day as rivals stood together as comrades. A prodigy who had learned humility, a zealot who had learned trust, and a boy with a dream who had learned he was not alone. "All right, Team Naruto," their new sensei said, his blue eyes sparkling with the promise of 1,000 adventures to come. "The real work starts now. Let's go get some ramen." Forging a team. The first official meeting of Team Naruto did not take place on a dusty training ground or in a stuffy classroom. It took place, as promised, at Ichiraku Ramen. The three boys sat awkwardly at the counter, a tangible mix of exhaustion, relief, and wary curiosity hanging between them. Tucci's father, his face beaming with a pride that outshone the steam from the broth, placed 3 massive bowls of ramen before them. "On the house," the man declared. "For Konoha's newest team." Naruto watched his students, a warm smile on his face. Hiruzen, the prodigy, was trying to maintain a cool indifference but kept glancing at the extra portion of Sheshu pork with undisguised longing. Danzo, the zealot, sat ramrod straight, analyzing the ramen as if it were a potential threat. And Tucci, the dreamer, looked as though he had just been invited to dine with the gods. "All right," Naruto said, breaking the silence as he dug into his own bowl. First lesson. A shinobi who can't enjoy a good meal is a shinobi who has forgotten what they're fighting for. He slurped his noodles loudly, much to Danzo's visible disgust. "Eat up. Today marks the beginning of your real training." The meal was a transformative experience. The shared victory and the simple, honest warmth of the ramen stand melted the last of their initial animosity. Hiruzen and Danzo even engaged Tucci in a conversation about his father's broth recipe, their rivalry momentarily forgotten in their shared appreciation for the food. Naruto saw it for what it was, the first, fragile thread of a real team bond being woven. Their training over the next few weeks was unlike anything they had expected. Naruto did not start with advanced ninjutsu or grueling sparring sessions. He started with the absolute basics. "Your fundamentals are a mess," he declared on their second day, after watching them go through their katas. He spent an entire week on nothing but taijutsu stances, footwork, and kunai throwing. He corrected Hiruzen's slightly too wide stance, which sacrificed balance for power. He forced Danzo to relax his rigid, tense form, which telegraphed his every move. He patiently guided Tucci, refining his raw effort into efficient, controlled movements. Then came the D-rank missions. It was a humbling experience for the two clan children. They chased after Tora, the infamous demon cat of the fire daimyo's wife, getting thoroughly scratched for their efforts. They pulled weeds in civilian gardens, a task Hiruzen found deeply insulting to his genius. They painted fences, a job Danzo performed with a grim determination as if he were fortifying a border wall. Through it all, Naruto taught. While pulling weeds, he taught them about local flora, identifying medicinal herbs and poisonous plants. While painting a fence, he had them practice their chakra control, using their energy to guide the brush strokes with perfect uniformity. While chasing the eternal demon cat Tora, he forced them to devise a complex, coordinated plan that involved herding the demonic feline into a carefully laid, non-lethal trap, a mission that required more teamwork and strategic thinking than any of their academy spars. Being a shinobi is not about grand battles and flashy jutsu, Naruto explained one afternoon as they sat, exhausted, after successfully capturing the cat for the third time. 99% of the job is patience, observation, and preparation. It's about understanding the world around you, and your place in it. The grand battles are just the final exam. He tailored his lessons to each of them. With Hiruzen, he focused on tempering his pride. He would present the boy with puzzles that couldn't be solved with a fireball jutsu, complex ciphers, tactical scenarios with no clear victor, and social situations that required empathy rather than power. "You are a genius, Hiruzen," Naruto told him after the boy had failed to deduce the solution to a particularly complex strategic problem. "But genius can be a cage. It makes you believe your first answer is always the right one. A true master understands that there is always more to learn, especially from those you consider your inferiors." He gestured to Danzo and Tucci. "Their perspectives are just as valuable as yours. Learn to listen to them." With Danzo, his approach was more direct. He saw the darkness in the boy, the cold, hard pragmatism that could so easily curdle into a belief that the ends justify any means. Naruto decided to fight that darkness with light. He made Danzo the team's designated protector. "Your ambition is a strength, Danzo," Naruto said during a tracking exercise. "But ambition without a purpose is just greed. Your purpose, on this team, is to protect your comrades. Hiruzen is our firepower. Tucci is our heart. You are our shield. Your speed, your tactical mind, they are best used to anticipate threats not to yourself, but to them. A leader who only protects himself leads no one." He would constantly place Danzo in situations where he had to choose between achieving the mission objective and ensuring his teammates' safety. Slowly, painfully, the boy began to learn the value of placing his comrades' lives above his own ambition. With Tucci, Naruto saw a reflection of his younger self. He saw the boundless determination, the unwavering belief in the good of others, and the frustration of being underestimated. He didn't just teach Tucci jutsu, he taught him confidence. "Your chakra reserves are smaller than theirs," Naruto explained as they practiced water walking on the stream. "You will never overpower them with raw force. So, you must be smarter. More efficient." He began to teach Tucci the basic principles of his own fighting style: redirection, using an opponent's momentum against them, and finding victory not in overwhelming power, but in perfect timing. He was teaching the future ramen chef how to be a different kind of shinobi, one whose strength came from his heart and his wits, not his bloodline. The three boys began to change. They started walking to the training ground together. They would share their lunch, arguing over who got the last rice ball. They began to move as a unit, their individual skills complementing each other. Hiruzen's powerful attacks would create openings that Danzo would exploit with swift, precise strikes, all while Tucci provided support, watching their backs and anticipating the opponent's next move. After a month of grueling D-rank missions and foundational training, Naruto gathered them at Training Ground 7. "I've just come from the Hokage's office," he announced, his expression serious. "We have a new mission. Our first C rank." The three boys straightened up, a new, professional focus in their eyes. "A group of bandits has been raiding merchant caravans on the road to the coast. They're led by a rogue shinobi, a missing nin from the Land of Stone. This isn't about chasing cats or painting fences. This is real. There will be danger. He looked at each of them, his gaze intense. Everything we've been working on, your teamwork, your skills, your trust in each other, will be put to the test. Are you ready? Hiraishin, Danzo, and Tucci looked at each other. They saw not a rival, not an obstacle, but a teammate. A comrade. They turned back to their sensei, their young faces set with a grim, shared determination. Yes, sensei, they said in unison. Naruto smiled. His team was forged. Now, it was time to see if they would bend, or if they would break. The Crucible. The journey out of the village was a new experience for the three Chūnin. The familiar paths of the Land of Fire, which they had only ever walked under the watchful eye of the village walls, now seemed wilder, filled with an unseen potential for danger. Naruto led them at a steady, professional pace, his easygoing demeanor from the training grounds replaced by the quiet, watchful focus of a Jonin commander on a mission. Hiraishin, brimming with confidence, took the point position, his eyes scanning the trees for threats, eager to be the first to prove his worth. Danzo moved like a shadow on their flank, his senses stretched, his posture radiating a tense vigilance. Tucci, positioned in the rear, was a bundle of nervous energy, his gaze darting everywhere at once, his hand constantly hovering near his weapon pouch. Relax, Naruto's calm voice cut through their tension on the first evening as they made camp. You're all wound as tight as a spring trap. A shinobi who can't rest is a shinobi who will be exhausted when the real fight begins. He gestured for them to sit. Danzo, you take first watch. Hiraishin, set the snares around the perimeter. Tucci, help me with the fire. He was not just giving orders, he was reinforcing their roles. Danzo the protector, Hiraishin the powerhouse, Tucci the supportive heart. As they worked, a quiet efficiency settled over them, the first signs of a well-oiled machine beginning to turn. They traveled for 2 days without incident, following the trade road that snaked through the dense forests towards the coast. On the third morning, Naruto, who had been walking with his eyes closed, suddenly stopped. They're close, he said softly. The three boys froze, their hands flying to their kunai. Where, sensei? Hiraishin whispered. Up ahead. A quarter mile, Naruto replied. A classic ambush point. A narrow pass with high ground on both sides. He looked at them, his expression serious. This is it. The plan we discussed. Remember your roles. Remember your training. But most importantly, remember each other. He melted into the trees, his presence vanishing completely. The three Chūnin were alone. They looked at each other, a shared, silent understanding passing between them. The training was over. They proceeded with caution, moving in a tight, triangular formation. As they entered the narrow pass, the world exploded. A hail of kunai rained down from the cliffs above, and a dozen rough-looking bandits leapt from the rocks, brandishing crude swords and axes. Now! Hiraishin yelled. He flashed through a series of hand signs. Fire style, fireball jutsu. He didn't unleash a massive, uncontrolled blast. He unleashed a series of smaller, precise fireballs, each one aimed at intercepting the kunai, creating a wall of smoke and confusion. It was a move designed to protect, not just to destroy. Through the smoke, Danzo moved like a phantom. He was a blur of motion, his kunai flashing as he engaged the charging bandits. He didn't go for kills. He moved with a cold, brutal efficiency, his strikes aimed at disarming them, at shattering their knees and elbows, neutralizing them as threats without taking a life. He was a shield, and he was holding the line. From behind a rock, the bandit leader, a hulking man with the headband of Iwa scratched through, sneered. Amateurs. He slammed his hands on the ground. Earth style, rock spear volley. The ground in front of Danzo erupted, a dozen sharp, stone spears shooting upwards, aimed at impaling him. Danzo! Tucci screamed. He didn't have a powerful jutsu to counter the attack. He had only his wits and his training. As Danzo leapt back, Tucci threw a single, perfectly aimed kunai. It wasn't aimed at the bandit leader. It was aimed at a small, almost invisible tripwire Danzo had set earlier. The wire snapped, triggering a net trap that shot up from the ground, not to catch the leader, but to intercept the rock spears. The stone projectiles slammed into the thick rope, their momentum broken. It was a brilliant, unexpected move. Tucci had used his teammate's own trap as a defensive shield. The bandit leader stared in shock at the boy he had completely dismissed. That moment of surprise was all Hiraishin needed. Earth style, swamp of the underworld. He yelled, slamming his own hands down. He had copied the jutsu's signs from the bandit leader, his prodigy's mind instantly deconstructing and replicating the technique. The ground beneath the bandits turned to a thick, inescapable mire, trapping them completely. In a matter of minutes, the entire bandit force was subdued, trapped, and disarmed, all without a single casualty on either side. The three Chūnin stood panting, their adrenaline singing, a look of shared triumph on their faces. They had done it. They had worked as a team. Not bad, a voice said from above. The Iwa missing nin dropped from the cliffs, landing lightly before them. He was lean and wiry, with cold, dead eyes that spoke of 100 real battles. You handled my grunts. But you are still just children. And I am a Chūnin. The pressure he exerted was on a completely different level. The three boys felt a wave of genuine killing intent wash over them, cold and sharp. I will take your heads back to Iwa, the man hissed. A gift to the Tsuchikage. He will be pleased to have the heads of Konoha's first Chūnin. He blurred, his speed far surpassing anything they had faced. He appeared before Tucci, his hand formed into a knife edge, aimed at the boy's throat. Hiraishin and Danzo moved instantly, not out of rivalry, but out of pure, protective instinct. Hiraishin unleashed a torrent of flame to force the man back, while Danzo appeared at Tucci's side, pulling him out of harm's way. They stood before their teammate, a human shield. You see? The missing nin sneered. Your sentimentality makes you weak. Predictable. No, a calm voice said from behind him. It makes them strong. The missing nin froze. He hadn't sensed him. He hadn't heard him. Naruto was simply there. His hand rested gently on the man's shoulder. Class is over, Naruto said softly. The Chūnin spun around, his eyes wide with terror. He saw not a man, but an abyss. Before he could even scream, a single, precise chop from Naruto sent him into the blackness of unconsciousness. Naruto stood over the fallen rogue shinobi, then turned to his three students, who were staring at him with wide, awestruck eyes. He gave them a proud, warm smile. You didn't flinch, he said. You didn't run. You protected your comrade, even when you were outmatched. He looked at each of them, at the prodigy who had learned to be precise, at the zealot who had learned to be a shield, and at the dreamer who had proven his worth. You didn't just pass a C-ranked mission today. You passed the most important test of your lives. As they tied up the bandits and their leader, preparing for the journey home, the three boys worked with a new, unspoken synchronicity. They were no longer just Team Naruto. They were brothers, forged in the crucible of their first true battle. And as they walked the road back to Konoha, they walked a little taller, their shadows stretching long behind them in the afternoon sun, the first generation of a new and powerful flame. Hokage Tower. 1 week later, Tobirama Senju placed a scroll on his brother's desk. The room was quiet, the only sound the scratching of Hashirama's pen on a mission report. The reports from the other nations are becoming concerning, brother, Tobirama began, his voice a low, serious hum. Hashirama looked up, his expression weary. More threats? I thought the Citadel taught them a lesson. Not threats, Tobirama corrected. Stagnation. Our peace is so absolute that it has created a new problem. Our shinobi are becoming complacent. The new generation, like Naruto's team, show promise, but they are being tested against bandits and D-rank threats. The shinobi of the other villages are the same. Without the constant pressure of war, the overall level of skill in the world is beginning to atrophy. He leaned forward, his red eyes intense. A shinobi's blade is sharpened through competition. Without it, the blade grows dull. A world full of dull blades is a world vulnerable to any new, sharp threat that may arise. Hashirama sighed, rubbing his temples. So what do you propose, Tobirama? That we start a war just to keep our skills sharp? No, Tobirama said, a new, radical idea taking shape in his brilliant mind. We create a substitute for war. A controlled conflict. A showcase. He unrolled the scroll, revealing a detailed proposal. I propose we reach out to the other villages. We invite them to send their best and brightest Chūnin to Konoha. Not for a battle, but for a competition. A series of tests, held publicly, to assess their skills and promote the most promising among them to the rank of Chūnin. He looked at his brother, his eyes gleaming with intellectual fire. It would be a way for the young to test their mettle against foreign shinobi, to foster competition and drive innovation. It would be a way for the villages to display their military might without spilling blood. A political theater that satisfies the need for dominance while maintaining the peace. He tapped the scroll. I call it the Chūnin selection exams. A wager for peace. The success of Team Naruto's first C-rank mission became a quiet legend within the village. The story of how three fresh-faced Chūnin, through flawless teamwork, subdued a Chūnin-led bandit force spread through the ranks, a testament to the strength of Konoha's new generation. For Naruto, it was a profound, personal victory. He had not just trained shinobi, he had forged a team. But while Naruto focused on the microcosm of his team, Tobirama was focused on the macrocosm of the world. His proposal for a Chūnin selection exam was initially met with skepticism by the village council. The idea of inviting foreign shinobi into their home, of willingly showcasing their own young talent, felt counterintuitive to a generation raised on secrecy and paranoia. The debate raged for days in the Hokage's council room. It was Naruto who cast the deciding vote. Tobirama is right, he stated, his voice silencing the dissenting elders. Peace cannot survive in a vacuum. It must be tested, reinforced. A blade that is never sharpened will rust. He looked at Hashirama, his expression firm. We have created a peace based on our overwhelming strength. Now, we must show the world we are strong enough to trust them. Even a little. It is a risk. But every step towards true peace is a risk. We must be the first to take it. With Naruto's backing, the proposal was passed. The die was cast. Konoha sent formal invitations to the other 4 great villages, calling for a summit in the neutral land of iron. The stated purpose was not one of crisis, but of fostering a new era of international cooperation and mutual prosperity. The other cage, wary but intrigued by this unprecedented move, agreed to attend. The second cage summit was a tense, frigid affair. The 5 leaders met in the same iron-forged fortress as before, the memory of their last encounter hanging heavy in the air. This time, however, Konoha came not with threats, but with a proposition. Tobirama, as the architect of the plan, laid it out with cold, impeccable logic. He spoke of the dangers of stagnation, of the need for controlled competition to maintain shinobi readiness. He framed the Chūnin exams as a substitute for war, a political theater where nations could showcase their strength, test their young prospects, and engage in a form of non-lethal dominance. He highlighted the economic benefits, the prestige, the opportunities for intelligence gathering. The reactions were predictable. A trick, sneered Ishikawa, the grizzled Tsuchika Javiwa. You want us to send our most promising Genin into your village, to parade their skills before your Sharingan eyes? You seek to catalog our strengths and weaknesses under the guise of a festival. A challenge, boomed A, the rakeage, his massive arms crossed. His pride was a palpable force. You believe your leaf shinobi are superior. We will gladly come and prove you wrong. But do not think we are blind to the risk. Reto, the pragmatic Kazekage, was more measured. The idea has merit. A controlled environment for advancement is logical. But Konoha's power is absolute. What guarantees do we have for the safety of our shinobi in your lands? Byakuren, the Mizukage of the Mist, remained silent, his face a mask of deep, insular paranoia. His village, with its prized and volatile bloodlines, had the most to lose by revealing its secrets on a foreign stage. The talk stalled, bogged down by centuries of ingrained distrust. Hashirama's earnest pleas for unity fell on deaf ears. They saw his idealism as a mask for Konoha's ambition. It was then that Naruto, who had been standing silently behind Hashirama, stepped forward. His presence instantly commanded the room's attention. You are all thinking like Kage, he began, his voice calm, but resonating with an authority that transcended politics. You are thinking of assets, of intelligence, of strategic advantages. You have forgotten what it is to be a Genin. He looked at each of them, his blue eyes holding a startling sincerity. I have recently taken on a team of my own. 3 boys. One is a prodigy, the son of a great clan, who believes the world revolves around his talent. Another is an orphan, ambitious and suspicious, who believes he must seize power to protect himself. The third is a civilian, with no great name or power, only a dream and a heart bigger than this mountain. He told them of their first mission, of how the 3 boys, who started as rivals, had learned to stand as a human shield for one another. He spoke not of their jutsu, but of their courage. You speak of showcasing your village's strength, Naruto continued, his voice softening. But a village's true strength is not in its S-rank jutsu or its cage. It is in the will of its youngest generation. It is in the heart of a boy like Tucci, who will stand against a Jonin to protect his comrades. He let his gaze sweep over them. This exam is not for you. It is for them. It is a chance for them to see the world beyond their own borders, to test their skills against others, to learn that a different headband does not automatically make someone an enemy. It is a chance for them to forge bonds, to understand each other. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You are worried about the risks. About fairness. Then let me be the guarantee. The pressure of his chakra filled the room for a fraction of a second, a silent, absolute reminder of the power he held in reserve. I, Naruto Uzumaki, the guardian sage of Konoha, give you my word. No harm will come to any participant outside the sanctioned rules of the exams. I will personally oversee the security. Your children will be as safe in Konoha as they are in your own homes. This is not a trap. It is a wager. A wager that our children can build a better, more peaceful world than we did. The cage were silent. Naruto had not appealed to their logic or their fear. He had appealed to their legacy. He had spoken to them not as rival leaders, but as old soldiers who knew the cost of sending children to war. It was Reto of the Sand who spoke first. A wager. He mused, stroking his chin. A bold one. He looked at Naruto, at the undeniable conviction in his eyes. The Sand accepts this wager. The Raikage slammed his fist on the table. The Cloud will not be outdone. We will send our best. And they will crush your Leaf Shinobi. Ishikawa of Iwa grunted, his pride forcing his hand. I still believe this is a trick. But Iwa does not shy away from a challenge. We will come. All eyes turned to Byakuren of the Mist. The Mizukage was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The Mist will observe this first exam. We will send a delegation, but no participants. We will see if your wager for peace holds true. An agreement was reached. The first ever Chūnin selection exams were to be held in Konoha in 6 months' time. A new chapter in the history of the shinobi world had begun, not with a declaration of war, but with a promise made to the next generation. As the cage departed, Tobirama approached Naruto, his expression a mixture of awe and utter bafflement. Your strategy, Tobirama said, was to appeal to their sentimentality. It was illogical, emotional, and should have failed. Naruto grinned. Sometimes, Tobirama, the most logical path isn't a straight line. Sometimes, it's a connection. The stage was set. The world's finest young shinobi would soon gather in Konoha, not as enemies, but as competitors. It was a bold step towards a unified future, but it was also a gathering of the world's future conflicts, all in one place. The peace was holding, but the seeds of new rivalries were about to be sown in the arena. The calm before the storm. The 6 months leading up to the Chūnin exams were a period of focused, frenetic energy for Konoha. The village transformed. An entire district was constructed to house the foreign delegations, a testament to Hashirama's Makuten and the village's burgeoning prosperity. A grand arena rose near the center of the village, its design a collaboration between Tobirama's stark functionalism and Hashirama's natural artistry. The air buzzed with a mixture of excitement and a deep, underlying tension. Konoha was not just hosting a competition, it was placing its ideals, its strength, and its very identity on a global stage. For Naruto, this period was a delicate balancing act. His days were consumed by his Junon team, and his evenings were a complex dance between the two powerful women who had laid a claim to his heart. The news that Team Naruto would be participating in the exams was met with a mixture of pride and intense pressure from the boys. The Chūnin exams. Hiruzen breathed, his eyes wide with a fire Naruto hadn't seen before. The chance to test my skills against the best of the other villages. I will not fail. This is not about individual victory, Danzo countered, his expression grim. It is a demonstration of Konoha's strength. Our performance will reflect on the entire village. Failure is not an option. Wow, Tucci said, looking between his two intense teammates. No pressure, right? Naruto's training regimen for them intensified, but it remained unconventional. While other teams focused on mastering powerful new jutsu, Naruto focused on honing their adaptability and teamwork to a razor's edge. He took them to the most dangerous, inhospitable training ground in the village, a dense, chakra-disrupting forest known as the Forest of Death. The first 2 stages of the exam, as designed by Tobirama, will not be a tournament, Naruto explained as they stood at the edge of the dark, foreboding woods. They will be tests of survival, teamwork, and intelligence under extreme pressure. Raw power will not be enough. He spent weeks drilling them in survival skills. They learned to navigate by the stars, to find water, to build shelters, to identify and create antidotes for the forest's venomous creatures. He would separate them, forcing them to find each other using only coded bird calls and prearranged signals. He would ambush them relentlessly, using shadow clones to simulate attacks from multiple angles, forcing them to rely on their trust in each other's senses to survive. Hiruzen learned that his powerful fire jutsu were useless if he couldn't protect Tucci from a flanking attack. Danzo learned that his carefully laid traps were only effective if Hiruzen could draw the enemy into them. And Tucci, with his quiet observation and growing confidence, became the team's linchpin, the one who saw the patterns the other two missed, the one who would notice a subtle shift in the wind that signaled an ambush. They were no longer 3 boys, they were a single, cohesive unit. Naruto's evenings were a different kind of training ground. His relationships with Toka and Satsuki deepened, each one a unique and essential part of his life. His nights with Toka were filled with fire and laughter. She would drag him to lively social gatherings, forcing the often reclusive sage to engage with the people of his village. She taught him to dance, to debate, to appreciate the fine art of a well-told story. She was a storm that pulled him into the vibrant, chaotic heart of life, refusing to let him retreat into the quiet solitude he was so accustomed to. One evening, as they walked home from a boisterous party held by the Sarutobi clan, Toka stopped and looked at him, her usual teasing smirk absent. "You're happy," she stated, her voice soft. "I am," Naruto admitted, surprised by the simple truth of it. "Good," she said, her hand finding his. "You deserve to be." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the sleeping village, their bond felt as real and as powerful as any alliance of nations. His time with Satsuki was a journey into a different kind of intimacy. They would spend hours in the Uchiha archives, a place of quiet history and profound sorrow. She shared her clan's secrets with him, not as a political maneuver, but as an act of profound trust. She showed him scrolls detailing the tragic progression of the Sharingan, the price of power paid in blood and loss. "We are a cursed clan, Naruto," she said one night, her voice heavy as they looked upon a portrait of an ancestor who had gone blind from overusing his mangekyo. "Our love is so strong that its loss creates a hatred that can burn the world. That is the fear Madara carries. The fear that he will one day love the village so much that he will destroy it to protect it. Then we'll just have to make sure he never feels that loss," Naruto replied, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He understood her cousin's burden in a way no one else could. Satsuki leaned into his touch, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he admitted. "But nothing worthwhile ever is." Their connection was a quiet, steady flame, a bond forged in shared understanding and a mutual desire to heal the wounds of the past. As the date of the exams drew near, the village began to fill with foreign shinobi. The first to arrive were the teams from Sunagakure. They walked with a quiet confidence, their faces wrapped against the unfamiliar humidity of the leaf, their eyes sharp and assessing. Among them, Naruto's sage senses picked up on a peculiar chakra signature. It belonged to a quiet, dark-haired boy with an unnervingly intense gaze that seemed to miss nothing. The boy's chakra felt cold, heavy, and possessed a strange, latent magnetic quality. Naruto recognized it as the rare magnet release Kekkei Genkai. The boy, whose name he would later learn was Zetsu, carried himself with a palpable isolation, his unique power setting him apart even from his own teammates. He was not a Jinchuriki, but Naruto could sense a formidable, lonely power slumbering within him, the potential that would one day make him the third Kazekage, the strongest in the Sans history. Next came the teams from Iwa, their shinobi walking with a stubborn, chip-on-the-shoulder pride. They looked at Konoha's wooden walls with disdain, their loyalty to their stone village absolute. The Cloud Nin arrived with a loud, boisterous arrogance, their Raikage's competitive spirit clearly instilled in his shinobi. Finally, a small, silent delegation from the mist arrived, not as competitors, but as observers, their faces hidden by masks, their presence cold and unsettling. The village was a powder keg, a volatile collection of old hatreds and new rivalries. The night before the first stage of the exam, Naruto stood atop the Hokage monument, looking down at his home. The streets were filled with shinobi from 5 different nations, their headbands a clashing array of symbols. It was the physical manifestation of Tobirama's gamble and his own wager for peace. Toka and Satsuki appeared beside him, their presence a familiar comfort in the tense atmosphere. "It's about to begin," Satsuki said, her voice a low murmur. "So much can go wrong. Or it can go right," Toka countered, her optimism a sharp contrast to the Uchiha's caution. Naruto looked at the 2 women beside him, at the village teeming with life and possibility below. He had faced down gods and ended wars. He had reshaped the past and secured the future. But this, he realized, was the true test. It was not a battle to be won with a Rasengan or a tailed beast bomb. It was a battle for the hearts and minds of the next generation. "Let them come," Naruto said, a calm, confident smile on his face as he looked out at the horizon. "Konoha is ready." The stage was set. The players were in place. The first Chūnin exams in history were about to begin, and with them, the first great test of the sage's peace. The opening gambit. The morning of the first Chūnin exam dawned crisp and clear, but the air in Konoha was anything but. A thick, palpable tension settled over the village, a static charge of anticipation, pride, and old animosities. The streets were lined with curious onlookers and watchful shinobi, their gazes fixed on the academy, where the future of the shinobi world was gathering. Inside a large, stark classroom, dozens of Junon teams sat in rigid silence. The room was a sea of unfamiliar faces and clashing headbands. The arrogant swagger of the Cloud Nin, the stubborn pride of the Stone Nin, the quiet intensity of the Sand Nin, all were packed together, their youthful bravado a thin veneer over a lifetime of ingrained hostility. Team Naruto sat near the center of the room. Hiruzen was a picture of calm confidence, his eyes scanning his foreign rivals with the cool assessment of a prodigy. Danzo was a coiled spring, his gaze missing nothing, his hands resting motionless on the desk before him. Chuchi, seated between them, was trying his best to look brave, but his wide eyes betrayed his nervous excitement. He had never imagined he would be here, a civilian-born boy sitting amongst the elite of the great nations. The doors at the front of the room slid open, and a man walked in, flanked by several Konoha Chūnin. He was tall and lean, with long, pale blonde hair tied back in a high ponytail that framed a sharp, intelligent face. His eyes, a piercing shade of green, swept over the room, and every Genin felt as though their innermost thoughts were being laid bare. This was Inoiki Yamanaka, the head of the Yamanaka clan and Konoha's foremost expert in psychological warfare. "Welcome, Genin," Inoiki's voice was smooth, calm, and carried an authority that instantly silenced the low murmurs in the room. "I am the proctor for the first stage of this exam. You will each be given a written test consisting of 9 questions." He gestured to the Chūnin, who began passing out the test papers. "You have 1 hour. The test is scored on a team basis. Your individual scores will be added together, and any team that does not achieve a sufficient total score will fail. And one more thing," he added, a faint, dangerous smile touching his lips, "any individual caught cheating will be disqualified immediately, along with their entire team." The rules were set. The tension in the room ratcheted up a dozen notches. As the test papers were placed before them, a collective, quiet gasp went through the room. The questions were not just difficult, they were impossible for a Genin. They covered advanced Fuinjutsu theory, complex cryptographic analysis, and obscure geopolitical history that even most Jonin would struggle with. Naruto, watching from a hidden observation room with the other Kage and Jonin sensei, chuckled softly. A classic Tobirama design. "What is the meaning of this, Hokage?" The Tsuchikage grumbled beside him. "This is not a test of skill, it is a test of encyclopedic knowledge." "On the contrary," Tobirama replied from his position in the corner, his arms crossed. "It is a test of the most fundamental shinobi skill of all, the ability to gather intelligence, covertly and effectively, under extreme pressure." In the classroom, the Genin were beginning to understand. The real test wasn't answering the questions. It was cheating without getting caught. A Sand Nin discreetly sent a tiny puppet, no bigger than an insect, crawling across the ceiling to peer at another's paper. A Cloud Nin used a sliver of metal to reflect the answers from a pencil across the room. But the Chūnin proctors, all hand-picked from the Hyuga and Uchiha clans, were vigilant. "Candidate from the Cloud, number 17. You and your team are disqualified." A Hyuga proctor called out, his Byakugan seeing through the ceiling. "Candidate from the Stone, number 32. Using a mirror is still cheating. You're out." An Uchiha proctor declared, his Sharingan catching the glint of light. Team after team was eliminated, their hopes dashed by a single mistake. Hiruzen stared at the paper, his prodigy's mind able to solve 2 of the 9 questions, but the rest were beyond him. Danzo sat perfectly still, his eyes darting, analyzing the proctor's patrol routes, looking for an opening. Chuchi just stared at the paper in a cold sweat, the complex equations looking like an alien language. "We have to work together," Hiruzen thought, remembering Naruto's lessons. He subtly tapped his foot on the floor in a coded rhythm they had practiced in the Forest of Death. Distraction. North wall. Danzo's eyes flickered in acknowledgement. Chuchi, understanding his role, tensed. Hiruzen raised his hand. "Proctor," he said loudly, his voice drawing the attention of the Chūnin near them. "I believe there is a misprint in question 7's formula." As the Hyuga proctor moved towards Hiruzen's desk, his attention diverted for a precious few seconds, Danzo moved. His hand blurred, sending a single, chakra-infused senbone needle across the room. It struck the paper of a brilliant Iwa Genin who had somehow managed to answer most of the questions, pinning it to the desk for a fraction of a second before Danzo used a chakra thread to whip it back. It was an act of breathtaking speed and precision. At the same time, Tucci accidentally dropped his pencil. As he bent to retrieve it, he caught the senbone from Danzo, palmed the paper, and passed it to Hiruzen, all in a single, fluid motion that looked like a simple, clumsy mistake. By the time the proctor had finished arguing with Hiruzen about the non-existent misprint, the intelligence had been gathered and distributed. They had worked as one. Finally, with only 15 minutes left, Inoiki called a halt. "Time is up," he announced. He looked around at the remaining teams, a faint smile on his face. Now for the 10th and final question. The tension returned. Before I give you the question, Inoiki continued, his voice turning serious, there is a new rule. You may choose not to answer the 10th question. If you choose not to answer, your entire team will fail. However, if you choose to answer and get it wrong, you will be barred from ever participating in the Chūnin exams again. A wave of fear and indecision washed over the room. The risk was immense. To fail now was one thing. To be barred forever was a stain on a shinobi's honor they would never erase. Hands began to go up. Team after team chose to withdraw, unwilling to risk their future on a single, unknown question. Danzo, Hiruzen, Tucci whispered, his voice trembling. Maybe we should wait. We can try again next year. Hiruzen looked at his teammate, at the genuine fear in his eyes. He thought of Naruto's words, of abandoning a comrade. He looked at Danzo, and saw not rivalry, but a shared, grim determination. No, Hiruzen said firmly, his voice loud enough for the proctors to hear. We're a team. We pass together, or we fail together. We're not backing down. He's right, Danzo added, his voice a cold, hard stone of resolve. To retreat is to admit defeat. We move forward. Tucci looked at his teammates, at their unwavering support, and his fear was replaced by a surge of fierce loyalty. He slammed his hand on the desk. I'm not afraid. He declared, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised everyone, including himself. Ask your question. We'll answer it. Inoiki Yamanaka smiled, a genuine, proud smile. Congratulations, he said to the remaining Junon. As for the 10th question, there isn't one. The room erupted in confused murmurs. The true 10th question, Inoiki explained, was the choice itself. It was a test of your resolve. A shinobi must be prepared to face impossible odds, to gather intelligence, and to make difficult decisions under pressure. But above all, they must have the courage to face the unknown without abandoning their mission or their comrades. He looked at them all, his gaze filled with respect. You have all shown that courage. You all passed the first stage. A wave of triumphant joy washed over the Junon. In the observation room, Naruto smiled. His team had understood the lesson. The successful teams were led from the academy to a new location, the massive, chain-link fence that surrounded the ominous, dark expanse of the Forest of Death. The air was suddenly colder, the cheerful sounds of the village replaced by the unsettling silence of the woods. A new figure stood before the gate, his arms crossed, his presence radiating an aura of cold, pragmatic authority that instantly chilled the celebratory mood. It was Tobirama Senju. Congratulations on passing the first stage, Tobirama said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. Do not celebrate. The true test begins now. He gestured to the dark forest behind him. This is Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death. Your objective is to survive. Each team will be given one of two scrolls, a Heaven Scroll or an Earth Scroll. To pass, you must reach the tower in the center of the forest with both a Heaven and an Earth Scroll within 3 days. He let the implications sink in. This means you must not only survive the forest and its creatures, but you must also find and take a scroll from another team. From this moment on, you are not just competitors. You are prey, and you are predators. His red eyes swept over them, cold and unforgiving. There are no rules in the forest, other than you may not open the scrolls until you reach the tower. And one more thing, he added, a grim finality in his tone. Be prepared to use lethal force. Your opponents will not hesitate. This is no longer an exam. This is a battle. He raised his hand. The gates will now open. Begin. With a deafening screech of metal, the gates to the Forest of Death swung open, revealing a dark, terrifying world of unknown dangers. And with a collective roar, the future of the shinobi world plunged headfirst into the crucible. Prey and predators. The deafening screech of the gate slamming shut behind them was a sound of absolute finality. The 66 Junon who had passed the first stage were now sealed within the Forest of Death, a sprawling, 44-kilometer arena of primal danger. The air inside was thick and humid, heavy with the scent of damp earth, rot, and the metallic tang of old blood. The canopy of the colossal trees was so dense it created a perpetual twilight, and the silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant shriek of some unseen creature. Split up and you die, Danzo stated immediately, his voice a low, sharp whisper. His eyes, cold and analytical, scanned the oppressive gloom. The first 24 hours will be a bloodbath. The weaker teams will be eliminated by the environment, the stronger teams will hunt each other. Our priority is not to hunt. It is to survive, observe, and choose our target. Hiruzen nodded, his usual prodigy's confidence tempered by a newfound caution. He's right. We find a secure location, set a perimeter, and gather intelligence. We have a heaven scroll. We need an earth scroll. We don't move until we have a target and a plan. Chuchi, his heart hammering against his ribs, focused on his breathing, trying to calm his nerves. He took his position in the center of their formation, his eyes darting, listening to the unnatural silence. He was their sensor, not of chakra, but of the subtle rhythms of the forest. They moved like ghosts through the undergrowth, Naruto's training having honed their stealth to a fine point. After an hour, they found a defensible position, a small, hollowed-out cavern hidden behind a curtain of thick vines near a stream. It was secluded, had a source of fresh water, and offered only one main point of entry. "This will be our base," Hiraishin declared. "Danzo, set your traps around the perimeter. Chuchi, scout the immediate area for tracks, see who has passed this way. I will maintain watch." They worked with a quiet, practiced efficiency that belied their age. Danzo laid a series of intricate, nearly invisible tripwires and snares. Chuchi, using the tracking skills Naruto had drilled into him, identified the tracks of 3 separate teams that had passed by within the last hour, noting their direction and approximate number. Hiraishin, perched in a high branch, watched the forest, his mind a calm, strategic map. They were no longer just a team, they were a functioning shinobi cell. In the central tower, a massive, sterile structure that rose from the heart of the forest, the mood was one of tense observation. In a circular room, a dozen large crystal balls glowed, each one showing a different part of the forest. Tobirama stood before them, a grim master of ceremonies, while the other Kage and Jonin sensei watched the fates of their students unfold. "Your son shows promise, Kazekage Dono," Tobirama commented, his gaze fixed on a crystal ball showing the quiet, intense Sannin, Zetsu. "He has already acquired a heaven scroll from a cloud team." The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Reto, the Kazekage, gave a thin, proud smile. "Zetsu understands that sentiment is a liability in the desert. He is efficient." Naruto watched a different orb, his own team. He saw them working together, their movements synchronized, their caution absolute. He felt a surge of pride. Beside him, Madara observed his own team, led by a fiercely competitive Uchiha prodigy, moving aggressively through the forest, clearly on the hunt. "Your team is cautious, Naruto," Madara noted, his voice a low murmur. "Mine seeks a swift victory." "A swift victory can lead to a swift defeat," Naruto replied calmly. "Patience is a weapon, too." For 2 days, Team Naruto waited. They survived on rations and the fish Chuchi caught from the stream. They watched as the number of active teams dwindled. They heard the distant sounds of battle, the roar of a fire jutsu, the sharp crack of lightning, the scream that was cut abruptly short. The grim reality of the exam settled upon them. This was not a game. On the morning of the 3rd and final day, Danzo, who had been scouting, returned to the cavern. "I have a target," he announced, his voice tight with focus. "A sand team. 2 boys and a girl. They're wounded, exhausted. They've been fighting a running battle with a stone team. They have an earth scroll. This is our chance." "The sand team with the magnet release user?" Hiraishin asked, his expression serious. They had heard whispers of the formidable Zetsu. "He is the one who is wounded," Danzo confirmed. "He used a large-scale jutsu to finish the stone team, but it cost him. He's breathing heavily. His teammates are supporting him. They are vulnerable." The 3 boys looked at each other. This was it. Their moment. They moved out, a predator triad closing in on its prey. They found the sand team resting in a small clearing. Danzo was right. The 2 teammates were tending to the dark-haired boy, Zetsu, who was leaning against a tree, his breathing labored. The earth scroll was clearly visible in the pouch on his hip. "I will create the diversion," Hiraishin whispered, his hands already forming seals. "Danzo, you will separate the teammates. Chuchi, your speed is average, but your presence is the least threatening. You go for the scroll." The plan was set. Hiraishin took a deep breath. Fire style, Great Dragon Flame Jutsu. A massive serpent of fire roared into the clearing, aimed not at the Chūnin, but at the trees behind them, creating a wall of flame and smoke that cut off their escape route. The Sannin jumped to their feet, instantly on alert. As the 2 teammates moved to protect their leader, Danzo struck. He was a blur, his wind-style jutsu creating sharp gusts of air that forced the 2 Sannin away from Zetsu, isolating him. It was a perfect opening. "Now, Chuchi!" Hiraishin yelled. Chuchi shot forward, his heart pounding. He was a straight line, his hand outstretched, his target the scroll. He was almost there. He stopped dead, his feet sinking into the ground. He looked down and saw that the earth around him had turned into a thick, black sludge. Did you really think it would be that easy? A cold voice asked. Zetsu stood up, his breathing still heavy, but his eyes burning with a cold, intense light. The ground around him shimmered, and a cloud of fine, black dust rose from the earth. Iron sand. You are fools to hunt a predator, even a wounded one, Zetsu stated. He flicked his wrist, and a dozen sharp needles of compressed iron sand shot towards Tucci. Tucci! Hiruzen screamed. He unleashed another blast of fire, but the needles passed through it, barely slowing. Danzo moved, appearing in front of Tucci and spinning a kunai, deflecting most of the needles with a shower of sparks. But two of them found their mark, piercing his arm and leg. Danzo grunted in pain, his leg buckling. Danzo! Tucci cried out, his fear momentarily forgotten in his concern for his teammate. Stay focused. Danzo snarled, pulling the needle from his leg. Get the scroll. Zetsu smiled, a cold, chilling expression. You cannot win. He raised his hands, and the cloud of iron sand swirled around him, forming into a massive, crushing wall that swept towards them. Sand-iron wall. Hiruzen and Danzo, both injured and exhausted, braced themselves for the impact. But Tucci, his mind racing, remembered Naruto's lessons. Don't overpower. Be smarter. He didn't have a powerful jutsu. But he had a water bottle. With a desperate cry, he threw his canteen at the base of the advancing iron sand wall. The water splashed against the black dust. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The water instantly made the iron sand at the bottom of the wall heavier, stickier, causing the entire structure to become unbalanced. It began to tilt, its momentum slowing as its own weight fought against its user's control. It was the smallest of openings, but it was all they needed. Hiruzen. The wind. Danzo yelled, seeing the opportunity. Hiruzen understood instantly. He poured the last of his chakra into a single technique. Wind style, great breakthrough. He didn't aim at Zetsu. He aimed at the base of the destabilized wall. The powerful gust of wind hit the heavy, wet sand, and the entire wall, instead of crushing them, was blown upwards and backwards, collapsing in on a stunned Zetsu. The sand prodigy was momentarily buried, his concentration broken. And in that single instant, Danzo moved. Ignoring the searing pain in his leg, he shot forward with a burst of speed that was pure, desperate will. He didn't attack. He slid past the collapsing wall, his hand darting out, and snatched the earth scroll from Zetsu's pouch. He landed beside his teammates, the precious scroll clutched in his hand. From the pile of iron sand, Zetsu slowly rose, his face a mask of disbelief. He was not defeated, not even seriously injured. But he had been outthought. Outmaneuvered. He looked at the three-leaf Chūnin. At the prodigy who had used wind to counter his earth. At the zealot who had risked injury to protect his comrade. And at the small, civilian-born boy who had defeated his ultimate defense with a bottle of water. For the first time, a flicker of something other than cold confidence appeared in Zetsu's eyes. Respect. The scroll is yours, he said, his voice a low murmur. You have earned it. Team Naruto didn't wait for a second invitation. They turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving the future Kazekage standing alone in the quiet clearing, a silent testament to the fact that teamwork, ingenuity, and a little bit of heart could be more powerful than any Kekkei Genkai. The tower and the tournament. The journey to the central tower was a grueling, 3-hour trek through the oppressive forest. Team Naruto moved with a new sense of purpose, their exhaustion masked by the electric hum of victory. Danzo, clutching the precious earth scroll, moved with a slight limp, the wound from Zetsu's iron sand needle a grim reminder of their hard-won battle. Hiruzen, his usual swagger replaced by a quiet, focused respect for his teammates, maintained a vigilant watch. And Tucci, who had been the key to their success, walked a little taller, the nervousness in his eyes replaced by a steady, earned confidence. They arrived at the tower to find a large, circular chamber already filled with the other teams who had survived the crucible. The air was thick with a mixture of pride, exhaustion, and simmering hostility. Naruto saw Madara's Uchiha team standing aloof in one corner, their expressions arrogant and unscathed. The formidable Cloud Nin team was there, their muscular forms radiating an aggressive energy. And leaning against a far wall, his arms crossed, was Zetsu of the Sand. His gaze met theirs across the room, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of respect, a gesture that spoke volumes. In total, 9 teams had passed the second stage. 27 Chūnin remained. Tobirama Senju stood on a raised platform at the front of the room, his presence casting a cold, authoritative pall over the assembled youths. Congratulations on surviving, he stated, his voice flat. You have proven you possess the necessary skills to navigate a hostile environment. However, your numbers are still too great for the final stage of the exam. A screen behind him lit up with a flash of chakra. Therefore, we will now hold a preliminary round to reduce the number of participants for the final tournament, which will be held in 1 month's time before the daimyo and the assembled dignitaries. He gestured to the screen. The matchups will be decided at random. The winners will proceed to the finals. Names began to flash across the screen, pairing off in a chaotic, randomized dance. A tense silence fell over the room as each Shin'an watched, their heart pounding. Hiruzen Sarutobi, Konoha, vs Gari, Iwa Danzo Shimura, Konoha, vs Toroi, Kumo Tuchi Ichiraku, Konoha, vs Pakura. Soon the matchups were set. Hiruzen was pitted against a powerful stone nin known for his explosion release. Danzo faced a cloud nin whose magnet release was second only to Retsu's. And Tuchi was matched against one of the San's most promising kunoichi, a user of the terrifying Scorch release Kekkei Genkai. In the observation room, Toka let out a low whistle. That's a tough draw for the ramen boy. Indeed, Naruto replied, his gaze calm. It is. The preliminary matches began immediately in the arena at the base of the tower. The first few fights were brutal and swift. Madara's Uchiha prodigy defeated his opponent with a single, elegant fireball jutsu. Retsu of the Sand won his match without even moving, his iron sand erupting from the ground to instantly incapacitate his foe. Then, it was Tuchi's turn. He stepped into the arena, looking small and utterly out of his depth against the confident, deadly Sand kunoichi, Pakura. A civilian born from the leaf? Pakura sneered, her hands already glowing with a faint, shimmering heat. This will be over quickly. The match began. Pakura was a whirlwind of aggressive attacks, launching desiccating orbs of heat that sizzled through the air. But Tuchi didn't try to meet her power with power. He moved, his feet light, his form fluid. He used the techniques Naruto had drilled into him, redirection, timing, and using the environment. He would use a small earth-style jutsu to create a puff of dust, obscuring her vision for a split second. He would lead her into the arena wall, forcing her to break her rhythm. He was not fighting to win, he was fighting to survive, to learn, to endure. The crowd, at first dismissive, began to watch with a growing respect. This civilian boy, with no bloodline and no powerful jutsu, was holding his own against one of the Sand's elite through sheer grit and ingenuity. He was a testament to the Leaf's core philosophy. But the gap in power was too great. Pakura, growing frustrated, unleashed her full power. Scorch release, extremely steaming murder. A series of burning orbs, like miniature suns, shot towards Tuchi. He dodged, but the intense, desiccating heat from one of them grazed his side. He cried out, his body instantly dehydrating, and collapsed to one knee, his strength failing him. The proctor immediately called the match. Tuchi had lost. But as the medics carried him from the arena, the entire stadium, filled with shinobi from every nation, erupted in applause. They were not cheering for a victor. They were cheering for the indomitable spirit of a boy who refused to give up. Tuchi had lost the match, but he had won the hearts of everyone present. Next was Danzo. His fight against the Cloud Nin, Toroi, was a blur of speed and tactics. Toroi's magnet release was powerful, his shuriken moving with an unnatural, deadly precision. But Danzo was a master of the battlefield. He used his wind style to create subtle currents that disrupted the magnetic fields, and his speed to close the distance, never giving his opponent a moment to think. The fight ended when Danzo appeared behind the Cloud Nin in a flicker of motion, a kunai pressed to his throat. It was a cold, efficient, and utterly dominant victory. The crowd applauded his tactical brilliance. Finally, it was Hiruzen's turn. His battle against Gari of the Stone was a showcase of pure, prodigious talent. Gari's explosion release was destructive, his clay bombs powerful enough to level the arena. But Hiruzen was a genius. He used his deep knowledge of ninjutsu to analyze and counter every attack. He used an earth-style wall to block a blast, then melted that same wall into lava with a fire-style jutsu, turning his opponent's own element against him. The fight ended with Hiruzen standing over a defeated Gari, not a single hair out of place. His victory was met with a roar of approval. He was the pride of Konoha, the prodigy who had proven the Leaf's superiority. As the preliminaries concluded, the finalists were announced. Hiruzen Sarutobi and Danzo Shimura of the Leaf. Retsu of the Sand. The Uchiha prodigy from Madara's team. A handful of others who had survived through skill and luck. The stage was set for the final tournament. Naruto met his team at the base of the tower. He helped a bandaged but cheerful Tuchi to his feet. "I'm sorry, sensei," Tuchi said, his voice filled with disappointment. "I lost." "No, you didn't," Naruto said, placing a proud hand on the boy's shoulder. You faced an opponent you knew you couldn't beat, and you didn't run. You fought with everything you had, and you showed everyone what the will of fire truly means. He looked at Hiraishin and Danzo. You all did. I'm proud of you. The three boys stood a little taller. They had entered the forest as individuals and emerged as a team. They had faced their fears, tested their limits, and shown the world the strength of the village hidden in the leaves. The exams were far from over, but Team Naruto had already achieved their most important victory. The month of miracles. The month between the preliminary matches and the final tournament was a crucible. For the finalists from every village, it was a period of intense, focused training, a time to sharpen their signature techniques and devise strategies to overcome their future opponents. For Konoha, it was a chance to prepare the stage, to welcome the Fire Daimyo and the other dignitaries who were arriving to witness this historic event. But for Team Naruto, it was the beginning of a transformation. Naruto gathered his 3 students at Training Ground 7 the morning after the preliminaries. Chuchi was still bandaged but his spirit was bright, Hiraishin was buzzing with the thrill of victory, and Danzo was a mask of cold, calculating focus. You all did well, Naruto began, his tone losing its usual easygoing nature, replaced by a sharp seriousness. Chuchi, you showed the world that the will of fire is not limited by bloodlines. Danzo, your tactical prowess was flawless. Hiraishin, your talent is undeniable. He paused, his gaze hardening. But it won't be enough. The boys looked at him, confused. The finals are not just a test, Naruto continued. They are a statement. This is the first time the great nations have gathered in peace. Every match will be scrutinized by the cage, by the daimyo. Your performance will be a direct reflection of Konoha's strength, of our ideals. We will not just win. We will astound them. But sensei, Hiraishin protested, we only have 1 month. How can we possibly improve enough to astound the cage? Naruto smiled, a slow, dangerous grin that made the 3 boys instinctively nervous. Because I'm going to teach you a jutsu that bends the very rules of time and training. A forbidden, S-rank technique that is my greatest secret. He brought his hands together in a familiar cross-shaped seal. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In a puff of smoke, a perfect, solid copy of Naruto appeared beside him. The clone grinned and waved. The boys stared, having seen this jutsu before on the battlefield, but never this close. This is not a normal clone, Naruto explained. It is a solid, physical copy of me, with its own thoughts and chakra. But its true power lies in its secret. He looked at them, his expression grave. Everything a shadow clone experiences, everything it learns, is transferred directly back to the original user the moment it dispels. The implication dawned on them, slow and then all at once. Hiraishin's eyes widened in shock. Wait. You mean? If a clone spends a day training, you gain a day's worth of knowledge in an instant, Naruto finished. It is the ultimate training tool. With enough clones, you can accomplish years of training in a matter of days. But the chakra cost. Danzo murmured, his analytical mind racing. To create even one solid clone must be immense. It's a kinjutsu for a reason. It is, Naruto confirmed. And it is dangerous. Push yourselves too far, and it could kill you. Your chakra reserves are not like mine. You will not be making hundreds of clones. You will make 1. Maybe 2, if you're Hiraishin. But even 1 clone, training alongside you every day for a month, will double your progress. You will enter that arena a month from now with 2 months of my personal, intensive training under your belts. He entrusted them with the hand sign, a secret shared between sensei and student. The training that followed was the most grueling period of their young lives. Naruto's plan was tailored to each of them, designed to amplify their natural talents to an astonishing degree. For Danzo, the focus was on strategy and elemental mastery. 1 clone would spend 12 hours a day in the village archives, devouring scrolls on tactics, history, and advanced wind-style ninjutsu. The other Danzo, the original, would spar relentlessly against Naruto, honing his taijutsu and speed to a razor's edge. Each evening, when the clone dispelled, Danzo would collapse, his mind reeling from the sudden, overwhelming influx of knowledge, his body screaming from the exertion. But each morning, he would rise faster, sharper, and more tactically brilliant than the day before. For Chuchi, the training was about control and ingenuity. His shadow clone was tasked with a single, monumental project, mastering the basics of medical ninjutsu. Under the tutelage of one of Naruto's own clones, the Chuchi clone practiced healing injured fish in the stream, learning the delicate chakra control required to mend flesh and bone. The original Chuchi, meanwhile, sparred with Naruto, who taught him not to fight, but to flow. He learned to use his opponent's strength against them, to turn a powerful offense into a critical mistake. He was not becoming a powerhouse, he was becoming a master of redirection, a shinobi whose greatest weapon was his opponent's own strength. But for Hiruzen, Naruto had the most audacious plan of all. "You are a Sarutobi," Naruto told him on the first day. "Your clan is known for its mastery of fire. But you are a prodigy, a genius who sees the world in a different way. Your potential is not limited to a single element." He handed Hiruzen 5 scrolls, one for each of the basic elemental transformations: fire, wind, water, earth, and lightning. "You have the highest chakra reserves on the team. You will create 4 clones. Each clone will practice a single element, day and night. The original you will work with me on combining them." It was an insane training regimen, one that would have killed a normal shinobi. But Hiruzen was not normal. He pushed himself to the absolute brink. His clones would collapse from chakra exhaustion, the knowledge flooding his mind, giving him splitting headaches that left him dizzy and nauseous. But he endured. Slowly, miraculously, he began to master them. He learned to create a wall of earth, then coat it in fire. He learned to infuse his shuriken with lightning, and to create gusts of wind that could shape the battlefield. He was not just learning jutsu, he was learning the very language of chakra itself. One afternoon, Toka and Satsuki came to observe the training. They watched in stunned silence as Danzo moved with a speed that rivaled his sensei's, his wind-style vacuum blades cutting through trees. They saw Tucci, blindfolded, perfectly parry a strike from a Naruto clone by feeling the shift in the air. And they saw Hiruzen, standing in the center of the training ground, create a small dragon of fire, then a wall of water to extinguish it, followed by a spear of rock from the ground. "By the sage." Toka breathed. "He's using 3 different elemental natures. A Genin shouldn't even be able to use 2. Naruto is not just training them," Satsuki observed, her eyes wide with a profound understanding. "He is remaking them. He is showing them a potential they never knew they possessed." The month passed in a blur of sweat, pain, and impossible growth. On the morning of the final tournament, Naruto gathered his team. They were exhausted, their chakra coils humming with a deep, resonant power. But their eyes burned with a new, unshakable confidence. They were no longer just the promising Genin of the Leaf. They were Team Naruto. And they were ready to show the world what that meant. As they walked towards the grand arena, the roar of the crowd already audible, Naruto placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "No matter what happens in there today," he said, his voice filled with a pride that was almost paternal, "you have already won. Now, go show them the strength of the will of fire." The world stage. The grand arena of Konoha was a testament to the village's newfound prosperity and power. It was a colossal structure of living wood and carved stone, packed to the rafters with thousands of spectators from every corner of the land of fire. The air was electric, a buzzing, joyous roar that was a stark contrast to the grim silence of the forest of death. In the central cage box, Hashirama Senju sat beside the fire daimyo, his expression a mixture of pride and nervous excitement. The other cage, Reto, Ishikawa, and A, sat with him, their faces impassive masks that betrayed none of their intense scrutiny. The Mizakage's delegation of observers watched from a separate, shadowed box, their silence as unnerving as ever. Naruto stood with Toka and Satsuki in a private viewing area just below the cage box. He felt a strange sense of detachment, like a playwright watching his work come to life. The stage was set. The actors were ready. The 8 finalists stood in the center of the arena floor, a collection of the most promising young shinobi in the world. Hashirama stood and addressed the crowd, his voice booming with warmth and authority, speaking of a new era of cooperation and friendly competition. Then, the matchups for the first round were displayed on the main board. Danzo Shimura, Konoha, versus Zetsu. Soon the crowd murmured in surprise. A high-stakes match right from the start. The cold, efficient tactician of the Leaf against the formidable magnet release user of the Sand. The 2 boys faced each other in the silent arena. "I was hoping I would get a chance to repay you for the humiliation in the forest," Zetsu said, his voice a low, cold hum. A cloud of black iron sand was already swirling at his feet. "The outcome will be the same," Danzo replied, his posture a steady and coiled tension. The match began. It was a battle of control versus speed. Retsu's iron sand was a versatile, deadly weapon, forming shields, spears, and crushing waves. But Danzo was a blur. He never stayed still, his movements augmented by his wind release, creating subtle air currents that made Retsu's precise control over the sand difficult. He didn't try to break through the iron defenses, he simply wasn't there when they struck. "He's using Retsu's own power against him," Satsuki observed, her Sharingan active. "Retsu's jutsu requires a stable medium to control. Danzo is using his wind to constantly shift the air pressure, creating micro-vortices that disrupt the sand's cohesion. It's brilliant. The battle ended not with a grand clash, but with a whisper. Zetsu, frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, overextended, sending a massive wave of sand forward. In that instant, Danzo vanished. He used the cover of the sand wave to appear directly behind Zetsu, a single, wind-infused kunai pressed against his neck. "Checkmate," Danzo said quietly. Zetsu stood frozen, defeated not by power, but by a strategy so flawless it was like a work of art. The crowd erupted in applause for the Leaf's tactical genius. The next match was Hiruzen's. He was pitted against a powerful Cloud Nin, a boy who used a ferocious lightning-based taijutsu. The Cloud Nin charged, his body a blur of blue electricity. Hiruzen stood his ground. "Earth style, mud wall," he said calmly, and a thick wall of earth erupted to block the charge. But he wasn't done. As the Cloud Nin smashed through the wall, Hiruzen's hands were already moving. "Fire style, Great Dragon Flame Jutsu." A massive dragon of fire shot through the hole in the wall, forcing his opponent to leap back. "Two elements," the Raikage grunted in the cage box, impressed despite himself. But Hiruzen was just getting started. As his opponent landed, Hiruzen clapped his hands together. "Water style, Water Dragon Jutsu." A second dragon, this one of swirling water, erupted from the ground, crashing into the Cloud Nin and drenching him completely. 3. The Tsuchikage breathed, his eyes wide. Before the Cloud Nin could recover, Hiruzen flashed through one final set of signs. Lightning style, Lightning Ball. A sphere of raw electricity formed in his hands and shot forward, striking the water-soaked shinobi. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The Cloud Nin collapsed in a heap, twitching and unconscious. Silence. The entire arena was stunned into a profound, disbelieving silence. A Jonin had just used 4 different elemental natures with a mastery that would put most Jonin to shame. In the cage box, the fire daimyo turned to Hashirama, his eyes wide with awe. "Hokage Dono," he said, his voice filled with respect. "What kind of training do you put your children through?" Hashirama just beamed with pride. Naruto, watching from below, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. His student hadn't just won, he had made a statement to the entire world. The tournament continued, but the outcome already felt inevitable. Hiruzen and Danzo both advanced to the final round, their skills and strategies placing them a clear level above the other competitors. The final match was a battle for the ages, Hiruzen Sarutobi vs Danzo Shimura. The prodigy versus the tactician. The heart of the leaf versus its sharp, pragmatic edge. It was the most intense fight of the day. Danzo's speed and wind jutsu were a perfect counter to Hiruzen's powerful, large-scale attacks. Hiruzen's versatility forced Danzo to constantly adapt, his tactical mind pushed to its absolute limit. They were perfectly matched, 2 sides of the same powerful coin. The battle raged for nearly half an hour, a breathtaking display of high-level ninjutsu and taijutsu. Finally, both boys stood exhausted in the center of the shattered arena, panting, their chakra reserves nearly depleted. "It's a draw," Danzo gasped, his body screaming with exertion. "Not yet," Hiruzen replied, a determined glint in his eye. He began weaving a complex series of hand signs. It was a jutsu no one had ever seen before. He slammed his hands on the ground. Elemental combination, Stonefire Dragon. The earth beneath Danzo erupted, but it was not just rock. It was superheated magma, which Hiruzen had created by compressing his earth and fire chakra together. A dragon of molten rock rose from the ground, its roar a symphony of grinding stone and hissing flame. It was a jutsu of cage-level complexity and power. Danzo, with no chakra left to defend himself, could only stare as the magnificent, terrifying creature loomed over him. But the dragon did not strike. It stopped, its fiery maw inches from his face, and then dissolved into steam and dust. Hiruzen had demonstrated his absolute superiority, but had chosen not to harm his comrade. Danzo looked at Hiruzen, at the hand he was offering to help him up, and for the first time, his cold, calculating eyes held a flicker of genuine, unadulterated respect for his rival. He took the offered hand. The crowd roared, a single, unified voice of pure adoration for their young heroes. Hashirama stood, his voice booming across the arena. The winner, and the first Chūnin of this new era, is Hiruzen Sarutobi of Konoha. The first Chūnin exams had been a resounding success. Konoha had not just showcased its strength, it had showcased its spirit. It had shown the world a prodigy with limitless potential, a tactician of unparalleled genius, and in Tucci, a boy with a hero's heart. As Naruto watched his 3 students stand together in the center of the arena, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had saved their world, and now, he was helping to build it. The will of fire was safe. It was burning brighter than ever, passed down to a new and brilliant generation. A new foundation. The aftermath of the Chūnin exams left Konoha basking in a golden aura of prestige and undeniable strength. The foreign delegations departed not with the simmering resentment of defeated rivals, but with a new, grudging respect and a burning determination to improve. The leaf had not just shown them power, it had shown them a new model for the future, a future where strength was measured not just in destructive jutsu, but in the indomitable spirit of its shinobi. The promotions were held a week later in the Hokage's office. Hiruzen Sarutobi and Danzo Shimura stood before Hashirama, their faces proud as the first Hokage officially promoted them to the rank of Chūnin. They were the first of a new generation, their advancement earned not on a bloody battlefield, but on the stage of international competition. Tuchi Ichiraku stood with them. Though he had not won his match, Hashirama had insisted on his presence. "While you will remain a Genin to continue honing your skills," Hashirama said, his voice warm and proud as he addressed the boy, "the village of Konoha wishes to recognize your extraordinary spirit. You faced a superior opponent with courage, ingenuity, and an unwavering loyalty to your comrades. You have shown every civilian-born child in this nation that the will of fire burns in all of us, not just those with famous names. For that, you are awarded this special commendation for exemplary service." He handed Tucci a scroll, and the boy accepted it with trembling hands and tears in his eyes. In the observation room, Naruto smiled. His team had not just succeeded, they had each become a symbol of the village's best qualities: talent, tactics, and heart. With their promotion, Team Naruto was officially disbanded, its members now ready to be integrated into the broader shinobi corps. Naruto gathered them one last time at Training Ground 7. "As of today, you are no longer my students," he told them, his voice filled with a pride he couldn't hide. "You are my comrades. You will be assigned to different squads, you will take on new missions, and you will forge your own paths. But the bond we forged here, as the first Team Naruto, is something you will carry for the rest of your lives. Never forget the lessons you learned here. Never forget each other." The three young men stood before him, no longer boys, but shinobi of the leaf. They gave him a final, respectful bow, a silent acknowledgement of the man who had not just taught them, but had shaped them. As they walked away, Hiruzen and Danzo already engaged in a heated but friendly debate over tactics, with Tucci walking between them as a cheerful mediator. Naruto felt a profound sense of accomplishment, followed by an equally profound sense of emptiness. His mission was complete. That evening, he walked the path back to his house on the outskirts of the village, the setting sun casting long shadows behind him. The feeling of emptiness lingered. For years, his life had been defined by grand, world-altering missions: finding the Baijuo, ending the war, eliminating Zetsu, training the next generation. Now, with his team graduated and the world at peace, a quiet, unfamiliar stillness settled over him. He had built a team, helped build a village, but what was his purpose now? He opened the door to his home, and the feeling of emptiness vanished, replaced instantly by a wave of warm, chaotic life. "You're late," Toka's voice called out from the main room, her tone a familiar mixture of amusement and challenge. Your son was demanding his father and threatening to unleash a tantrum of cage-level proportions. Naruto chuckled, the weariness of the day melting away. He walked into the room to a scene that was the very definition of his new life. Toka was on the floor, surrounded by sealing scrolls and ink brushes, trying to teach a giggling 3-year-old Minato how to draw a simple chakra containment seal. The boy, who had his father's bright yellow hair and his mother's fiery spirit, was currently more interested in painting his face with the ink. Across the room, Satsuki sat in a rocking chair by the window, the moonlight illuminating her serene features. She was humming a soft Uchiha lullaby to 2.5-year-old Kushina, who was already fast asleep in her arms, the girl's dark hair a stark contrast to her father's bright blue eyes. The room was a perfect fusion of their two worlds, the vibrant, energetic chaos of the Senju and Uzumaki, and the quiet, profound peace of the Uchiha. "How was the promotion ceremony?" Satsuki asked, her voice a soft melody that didn't disturb the sleeping child in her arms. "They were great," Naruto said, his heart swelling with pride. He knelt down and gently wiped an ink smudge off Minato's cheek, earning a delighted squeal from the boy. "They've become fine shinobi." "Of course they have," Toka said, ruffling their son's hair. "They had a good teacher." She looked up at Naruto, her sharp eyes softening. "You look tired." "The good kind of tired." "It's strange," Naruto admitted, sitting down on the floor beside her. "My team is gone. The exams are over. For the first time in a long time, I don't have a world to save." "Good," Satsuki said simply from her chair. "The world can learn to save itself for a while." Your family needs you. Naruto looked around the room. He looked at Toka, his fiery, brilliant partner who challenged him to live fully. He looked at Satsuki, his calm, steady anchor who gave him a peace he never thought possible. He looked at his son, whose laughter was the brightest sound in the world, and at his daughter, whose quiet breathing was the most peaceful. The grand purpose that had driven him across time and space had been fulfilled. The prophecies were complete, the ancient evils vanquished. All that was left was this. The small, profound, and infinitely precious mission of being a husband and a father. He had fallen through time to save the world, but in the process, he had found something far more important. He had found a home. In building a new world, he had also built a new kind of family, one founded not on tradition or duty, but on the radical, unshakable belief in the power of connection. The future was unwritten, but for the first time, Naruto was certain he would not have to face it alone. Chapter 12, Epilogue, Part 1, The Gilded Age. 10 years. A decade is a lifetime in the world of shinobi. It is long enough for a Jonin to become a Jonin, for a village to rise from the mud, for the bitter memories of war to fade into the stories told by old men. For Konoha, the past 10 years had been a golden age, an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity forged in the crucible of the Chūnin exams and maintained by the absolute, unquestionable power of its guardian sage. The pax Naruto held firm. The village had grown into a sprawling metropolis. The great wooden walls, once a desperate defense, now felt like the gentle, embracing arms of a benevolent giant. Trade flourished, and the streets were a vibrant tapestry of clans from every corner of the land of fire and beyond, all living under the single banner of the leaf. The Chūnin exams had become a biannual tradition, a festival of competition that allowed the great nations to flex their strength without spilling blood, a brilliant piece of political theater that had successfully replaced the cycle of war. The founders, once boys who skipped stones across a river, were now men etched with the weight of a nation. Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, was a beloved, if often overwhelmed, statesman. The fire of his youthful idealism was now tempered by the pragmatism of governance, his desk buried under treaties and trade agreements. Madara Uchiha was the unyielding pillar of the village's strength, the stern but respected leader of the military police. His rivalry with Hashirama had mellowed into a complex, powerful partnership, two kings ruling a single, vast chessboard. And Tobirama, the eternal pragmatist, was the village's engine, the head of the academy and the founder of a new, secret organization known as the Anbu Black Ops, his brilliant mind constantly innovating to protect the peace they had all built. Naruto, now 37 years old, had settled into a life he never could have imagined. His role as guardian sage had become largely ceremonial. He was a living symbol of their strength, a legend whose presence alone kept the world in check. He spent his days not on battlefields, but in the quiet moments of fatherhood. His home was a place of beautiful, chaotic balance. The family had grown. Minato, now a spirited 13-year-old, had his father's sun-kissed hair and his mother Toka's sharp, intelligent eyes. He was already a prodigy in the academy. 12-year-old Kushina was her father's heart, possessing her mother Satsuki's dark Uchiha hair but her father's brilliant blue eyes and boundless empathy. The youngest were the 8-year-old twins. Arashi, a boy with classic Uchiha features, was quiet and observant like his mother, while his sister, Kasumi, was a tiny firecracker with a shocking mane of Uzumaki red hair and Toka's fierce energy. They were his world. His purpose. The lonely ghost from the future had been replaced by a husband and a father, a man rooted in the rich, fertile soil of the family he had built. But a quiet, chilling unease had begun to creep into the corners of his perfect life. It started with a glance in the mirror. He saw the same face that had arrived in this era over a decade ago. The same sharp blue eyes, the same sun-blonde hair. There were no new lines, no hint of gray at his temples. He looked eternally 25. He looked at his wives, and he saw the beautiful, subtle changes of time. Toka, now in her mid-30s, had a new maturity in her gaze, a confidence that had settled from fiery youth into a powerful grace. Satsuki, just a year younger, had a serene strength, the sharp edges of her Uchiha pride softened by a decade of peace and motherhood. They were growing, changing, becoming even more beautiful with each passing year. He was not. He looked at his friends. Hashirama's hair was now streaked with distinguished gray, the weight of his office etched onto his kind face. Madara's proud features were now sharper, harder, the lines of a man who had carried the burden of his clan and his village for a decade. He was an island, and the river of time was flowing past him. One evening, he sat in his study, the realization a cold, heavy stone in his gut. "It is the nature of your power, Kit," Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, the words holding a grim, ancient wisdom. "You are not just a Jinchuriki. You are the perfect vessel, the meeting point of the sage's own lineage. Your life force, intertwined with mine and the natural energy of the world, does not decay in the same way as a normal mortal's. You are durable. I'm not aging, Naruto whispered to the empty room. I'm never going to age. The implication was terrifying. He would watch his friends grow old. He would watch his wives, the two pillars of his world, fade like beautiful sunsets. He would watch his children grow up, have children of their own, and pass into memory. And he would remain unchanged. An eternal guardian, forever alone. The loneliness he thought he had vanquished threatened to return, a tidal wave of existential dread. He would not allow it. He would not let his nature become a source of pain for the family he loved more than life itself. He would not let his children see their father frozen in time, a constant, painful reminder of their own mortality. He made a decision. If the world would not let him age, he would force it to. For the next month, he locked himself away in the Uzumaki archives, a privilege granted to him by Lord Ashina years ago. He pored over the most ancient, most complex scrolls of Fuinjutsu and Genjutsu. He was not looking for a weapon. He was looking for a mask. He found what he was looking for in a dusty, forgotten text on metaphysical sealing. It was a theoretical jutsu, one so complex and so dangerous that no one had ever attempted it. A seal that could be woven directly into a user's own chakra network, designed to project a permanent, subtle, and self-sustaining genjutsu. An illusion that would not just fool the eye, but would fool the senses of even the most powerful shinobi. An illusion of aging. He spent weeks perfecting the formula, tailoring it to his own unique chakra. It was the most intricate piece of work he had ever attempted, a fusion of Uzumaki sealing arts, sage-level chakra control, and a desperate, loving heart. On the night of his 38th birthday, he stood before the mirror in his study. He saw the face of a 25-year-old man staring back at him. With a deep breath, he performed a single, complex hand sign and pressed his thumb to his own forehead. Illusion seal, the weight of years, he whispered. A faint, golden light spread across his skin, a web of intricate seals that glowed for a moment before sinking into him, vanishing completely. He felt no pain, only a subtle shift, as if a new layer had been added to his very soul. He looked in the mirror. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The faintest of lines now crinkled at the corners of his eyes. The sharp edges of his jaw had softened with a hint of maturity. He no longer looked like a man frozen in time. He looked like a man of 38. He looked right. A profound sadness washed over him. The lie he would now have to live was a heavy one. But as he thought of his family, of the peace this gentle deception would buy them, he knew it was a burden he would gladly carry. He stepped out of his study. Toka and Satsuki were waiting for him with a small cake, Minato and Kushina standing beside them, their faces alight with excitement, the twins asleep in their beds. "Happy birthday, old man," Toka said with a brilliant smile. "Happy birthday, father," his older children chorused. Naruto looked at their happy, loving faces, and his sadness was replaced by a wave of profound, overwhelming love. He had found his purpose. It was not to save the world, but to cherish it, for as long as he was able. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with an emotion they would never fully understand. "It's good to be home." Epilogue, Part 2, The Setting Sun. Another 10 years passed. The world turned, seasons changed, and the golden age of Konoha continued, its foundations solid as the bedrock beneath it. The Pax Naruto was no longer a new, fragile concept, but an established reality. The biannual Chūnin exams had become a grand tradition, a symbol of the new world order where young shinobi tested their mettle in friendly competition, their rivalries forging bonds of respect rather than hatred. Naruto was now 47, a fact maintained by the subtle, constant hum of the genjutsu seal he had placed upon himself. To the world, he was the revered guardian sage, a man entering the autumn of his years with grace and wisdom. His hair, under the illusion, was now shorter, more practical, and streaked with a distinguished silver at the temples. The faint lines around his eyes, which he meticulously allowed to deepen with each passing year, spoke of a life filled with laughter and concern. He was a perfect portrait of a man aging alongside the village he had helped build. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking lie. His children were no longer children, they were pillars of the next generation. Minato, at 23, was a jonin of such renown that he had already earned a moniker of his own, the Golden Gale of Konoha, a tribute to his father's Hiraishin, which he had begun to master with a genius that even Tobirama found remarkable. Kushina, at 22, was a formidable jonin in the Uchiha police force, her serene demeanor belying a fierce will and a unique sensory ability that combined her Uchiha perception with her Uzumaki life force sensitivity. The twins, Arashi and Kasumi, now 18, were newly promoted Chūnin, their teamwork a legendary thing within their cohort, Arashi's quiet, precise Uchiha fire style a perfect complement to Kasumi's wild, unpredictable Uzumaki sealing chains. His wives, Toka and Satsuki, had aged with a powerful grace. They were now matriarchs, their wisdom and strength a guiding force within their respective clans and in the village council. Toka's fiery spirit had matured into a brilliant, commanding presence, while Satsuki's quiet strength had deepened into a profound, unshakable peace. Naruto loved them more with each passing day, and with that love came a quiet, gnawing pain. He saw the silver that now threaded through Toka's dark hair, the fine lines that mapped a lifetime of smiles on Satsuki's face, and knew that he was a fixed point in their flowing river. The founders, his friends, were now entering a new phase of their lives. Tobirama, at 40, was the unyielding pillar of the village's systems, his Anbu a silent, efficient force that maintained the peace from the shadows. Hashirama, at 42, was still the beloved first Hokage, though the decades of leadership had tempered his boisterous energy into a quiet, steady warmth. His greatest joy now came from watching the village thrive, a living testament to his dream. It was Madara who marked the true turning of the era. At 42, he was the respected and feared patriarch of the Uchiha. But the long years of peace, the absence of existential threats, and the quiet joy of watching his clan flourish within the village had done what no battle ever could, it had softened the edges of his pride. He had found a different kind of strength, not in conflict, but in legacy. He called a joint meeting of the Uchiha and Senju clan councils, with Hashirama, Tobirama, and Naruto in attendance. In the great hall, he stood before them, his presence as commanding as ever. For 20 years, Madara began, his voice echoing with a quiet authority, I have led the Konoha military police force. I have served this village, and I have protected my clan. But the time has come for a new generation to carry the torch. He looked out at the assembled shinobi, his gaze finally resting on his cousin, Satsuki, and his daughter, Kushina. I am formally retiring from my position as the head of the police force. It is time for new eyes to watch over this village. The announcement sent a wave of shock through the council. Madara Uchiha, voluntarily relinquishing power, was something no one had ever thought possible. Later, Naruto found him standing alone at the Naka River, at the very spot where they had first met as boys. Retiring? Naruto asked, standing beside him. I never thought I'd see the day. Even a storm must pass, Madara said, his gaze fixed on the flowing water. My fight is over, Naruto. We won. He looked at his old rival, a faint, genuine smile on his face. Hashirama and I. We built the house. You exorcised its ghosts. Now, it is up to the children to live in it. The retirement of Madara was the true setting of the sun on their generation. It was a peaceful, voluntary end to an era of conflict, a final, definitive victory for the will of fire. But for Naruto, it was another painful reminder of his own static existence. He was watching his friends move on, entering the next stage of their lives, a stage he could never reach. The lie of his aging appearance felt thinner, more fragile than ever. That night, Naruto stood alone before a mirror, the moonlight streaming through the window. He let the genjutsu seal on his face dissolve. In the reflection, he saw the face of the 25-year-old man who had fallen into this world so long ago. The face was unchanged, untouched by the 22 years that had passed. It was the face of a stranger. You were right, Kurama, Naruto whispered to the silence. This is a lonely path. They live their lives like brilliant, brief flames, the fox replied, his voice a low, somber rumble. You are the mountain that watches the fireflies dance. It is the price of your power. Naruto looked up at the moon, the same moon he had once fought to protect. He had saved this world, saved his friends from their tragic destinies, and built a life of unimaginable joy. But he was now faced with a new, inescapable enemy, time itself. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the day would come when he would have to watch every brilliant flame he loved flicker and die, leaving him alone in the encroaching darkness. The Gilded Age was prosperous and peaceful, but for the immortal Guardian Sage, the long, lonely twilight was just beginning. Epilogue, Part 3, The Last of the Sun. The river of time flows on, indifferent. Another decade passed, carving new lines on the face of the world, and on the faces of all but one of Konoha's citizens. The village was a bastion of peace, a shining beacon in a world that had, for the most part, accepted the new reality. The Chūnin exams were a celebrated institution, and the Pax Naruto had become so deeply entrenched that the children of the newest generation could not even conceive of a time when the great nations were at war. Naruto was now 57 years old. The genjutsu seal he maintained was a masterpiece of quiet deception. His hair, in the illusion, was almost entirely silver, his face a mask of dignified age, etched with the wisdom and sorrow of a long, eventful life. He moved with a slower, more deliberate grace, a conscious effort to mimic the weariness of the years he could not feel. He was the beloved old man sage, a living monument to the village's history, a grandfather to a nation. His children were now legends in their own right. Minato, at 33, was a Chūnin commander whose speed on the battlefield was said to be instantaneous, a true heir to the Hiraishin. Kushina, at 32, had succeeded her mother as the captain of a special division within the Uchiha police force, her unique sensory abilities making her the most formidable tracker and interrogator in the village. The twins, Arashi and Kasumi, at 28, were elite Chūnin, their combined Uzumaki and Uchiha heritage creating a fighting synergy that was beautiful and terrifying to behold. His wives were the grand dames of the village. Toka, now in her late 50s, was a respected elder on the Hokage's council, her fiery spirit tempered into a brilliant, sharp wisdom. Satsuki, a year younger, had taken over the Uchiha clan's archives, becoming a master historian, her quiet strength a bedrock for her people. They had aged beautifully, their love for Naruto a deep, quiet river that had weathered the decades. And every new silver hair on their heads was a fresh stab of pain in Naruto's timeless heart. The other founders were old men now, their generation's sun finally setting. Madara, at 52, was a true elder statesman, having found a quiet peace in teaching the next generation of Uchiha, his rivalry with Hashirama a fond and distant memory. Tobirama, at 50, was the second Hokage, his rule as pragmatic and efficient as ever, though the lines of worry on his face had deepened with the immense responsibility of maintaining the peace. But it was Hashirama who was fading. The god of shinobi, whose life force had been a raging sun, was now a flickering candle. The price of his power, the constant, accelerated regeneration of his cells, had burned through his life's fuel. At 52, he was an old man, his body frail, his great strength a memory. He had retired from his post as Hokage years ago, ceding the position to his brother, and now spent his days in the quiet of his home, tended to by his wife, Mito. Naruto's daily visits were the anchor of Hashirama's final years. They would sit on the porch for hours, watching the village, their silence filled with a perfect, unspoken understanding. "I had a dream last night," Hashirama said one afternoon, his voice a frail whisper. "We were boys again, skipping stones on the Naka. You were there, too. You just appeared out of the water, laughing." He turned his head, his old eyes, clouded with age but still holding a familiar warmth, fixed on Naruto. "You haven't changed at all, have you, my friend?" "Not really." Naruto's heart stopped. He looked at Hashirama, at the knowing, gentle sadness in his gaze. He knew. Somehow, the man whose very soul was connected to the life of the world had sensed the truth beneath the illusion. "The genjutsu is a masterpiece, Naruto," Hashirama continued, his voice soft. "But I do not see with my eyes anymore. I feel. And I feel a life force in you that is as strong and as steady as the mountain. It does not fade." A single tear rolled down his wrinkled cheek. "It is a terrible, lonely burden you carry." Naruto couldn't speak, the secret he had carried for 30 years finally laid bare. He simply nodded, his own eyes burning. "Don't let it be," Hashirama whispered, his grip on Naruto's arm surprisingly firm. "Live for all of us who cannot. Find joy. Build things. Watch the children grow. Your life. It is our legacy. Do not let it become a prison." Those were the last words his friend ever spoke to him. Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, passed away that night, his hand held by his wife, his heart at peace. The funeral was the largest in the village's history. The fire daimyo attended, as did delegations from every great nation, coming to pay their respects to the man who had ended the age of war. Naruto stood with his family, his face a perfect illusion of aged grief, his heart a hollow, aching void. He watched his children and his wives weep openly. He watched Tobirama stand stoically before his brother's grave, a single tear cutting a path through his stoic resolve. He watched Madara, a man who had not cried in 50 years, openly sob, his body shaking with the loss of the other half of his soul. Naruto felt a profound, chilling jealousy. They could grieve. They could feel the finality of loss, the natural, painful, and beautiful cycle of life and death. He could only observe. He was a stone in the river, and the water of their lives was flowing away from him, leaving him cold and alone. That night, he stood once more before the mirror in his study. He let the genjutsu fade. The face of a 25-year-old man stared back, his eyes ancient and filled with a sorrow that no illusion could ever hope to replicate. He was a ghost in his own life, a living memory in a world that was moving on without him. It is the curse of the mountain to watch the forest grow and wither, Kurama's voice rumbled, softer and more somber than Naruto had ever heard it. But the mountain also gives the forest its strength, its foundation. You are their foundation, Naruto. Naruto knew the fox was right. But the knowledge was cold comfort. He had saved his friends from their fated, violent ends, only to be forced to watch them fade away peacefully. He had traded a future of tragic conflict for one of quiet, personal heartbreak. He looked out the window at the village, at the Hokage monument where a new, second face now stood carved beside the first. The era of the founders was truly over. And before him stretched a long, lonely, and uncertain road, a twilight path he would have to walk forever. Epilogue, Part 4, The Long Twilight. Another decade turned. The world continued its slow, inexorable march forward. The peace held, a testament to the strength of the foundation the founders had built. The great villages, once bitter rivals, were now established partners in a complex dance of diplomacy, trade, and competition. Konoha remained the sun around which the other nations orbited, its power undiminished, its will for peace a guiding principle for the entire world. Naruto was now 67 years old. His illusion was a work of art, a masterpiece of deception born of love. The face he showed the world was that of a venerable old man, deeply lined with the wisdom of his years, his silver hair thin, his movements slow and deliberate. He was great sage Sama, a living piece of history, a figure of myth who would occasionally be seen walking through the village with his grandchildren, his blue eyes, the only part of him that never seemed to age, twinkling with a gentle warmth. His life was full, yet tinged with a constant, quiet sorrow. His children were now the pillars of the village. Minato was the stoic and respected head of the Anbu Black Ops, his speed a thing of legend. Kushina commanded the Uchiha police force with a grace and wisdom that had earned her the respect of even the most prideful Uchiha elders. The twins, Arashi and Kasumi, were renowned jonin, their combined skills making them the village's most formidable team. They had families of their own, and Naruto's home was often filled with the chaotic, beautiful sound of his grandchildren's laughter. But time was a cruel and relentless thief. Toka and Satsuki, now in their late 60s, were fading. The fire in Toka's spirit still burned brightly, but her body was frail. Satsuki's quiet strength was now a fragile, delicate thing. He would spend his days with them, sharing stories, holding their hands, his heart breaking with every new wrinkle, every tremor in their touch. He was their constant, unchanging rock in the river of their fading lives, and the stability he provided them was a source of both profound comfort and agonizing pain for him. The last of his old friends were gone. Madara had passed away peacefully 5 years prior, a respected elder surrounded by his family, his lifelong rivalry with Hashirama having mellowed into a legendary friendship that was now taught to academy students. Tobirama, the second Hokage, had ruled with a firm, pragmatic hand for years before finally succumbing to old age, leaving the village in the capable hands of his chosen successor. The Hokage's seat now belonged to Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage. Naruto's student, the prodigy he had shaped, was now the leader of the most powerful village in the world, his wisdom and strength a credit to his sensei's teachings. It was on a quiet autumn evening, as the leaves began to fall from the trees, that Naruto knew the time had come. He had watched Toka struggle to climb the steps to their porch that day, had seen the profound weariness in Satsuki's eyes as she watched their grandchildren play. He could not bear it any longer. He could not watch them leave him. The lie had become too heavy, the prison of his immortality too cold. He made his decision. He summoned Hiruzen, not to the Hokage Tower, but to the one place in the village that was truly his, the hidden chamber deep beneath the Hokage monument, a place he had secretly constructed years ago, its walls covered in the most powerful silencing and protection seals imaginable. Hiruzen arrived, now a man in his prime, his face etched with the lines of leadership, but his eyes still holding the deep respect he had for his old master. "Sensei," he greeted with a bow. "You summon me. Is something wrong?" "No, Hiruzen," Naruto said, his voice quiet. "Everything is right. It is just time." With a soft sigh, he let the genjutsu that he had maintained for over 30 years dissolve. Hiruzen gasped, his eyes widening in utter disbelief. The venerable, 67-year-old man before him vanished, replaced by the face of a man of 25. The silver hair, the wrinkles, the weary posture, all gone. All that remained was the timeless, powerful figure he had first met at Training Ground 7, his blue eyes now filled with an ancient, profound sorrow. "Sensei. What is this?" Hiruzen whispered, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossibility. "This is the truth of me, Hiruzen," Naruto said gently. "I am a man out of time. My power, my very life force, does not allow me to age as you do. I am unchanging. He explained everything. His journey through time, his role in shaping their history, the burden of his agelessness. Hiraishin listened in stunned silence, the entire history of his world being rewritten before his eyes. The legendary guardian sage was not just a hero, he was a paradox, a living god who had carried the weight of their future since before they were even born. I can no longer stay, Naruto continued, his voice heavy. To watch Toka and Satsuki fade, to watch my children and grandchildren grow old and pass away while I remain. It is a torment I cannot endure. And my presence, as an immortal being, would eventually become a source of instability, of fear, for this village. A god cannot live among men forever. He walked to the center of the chamber, where a single, ornate stone sarcophagus rested. The world believes I am 67. In a few years, it will be believable for the old man sage to pass away peacefully in his sleep. I will fake my death. And I will enter a long slumber, here, in this chamber, sealed away until an age when the world may have need of me again. He turned to his student, his expression one of absolute trust. But the village cannot be left without its ultimate guardian. He held out a single, intricate scroll, its casing covered in complex Fuinjutsu script. This scroll is Konoha's greatest secret. It contains the key to this chamber, and the method to awaken me. It is to be passed down from Hokage to Hokage, its existence known only to you. It is to be used only in a moment of absolute, world-ending crisis. A threat so great that the village itself faces annihilation. Hiraishin took the scroll, his hands trembling. The weight of the secret, of the responsibility, was immense. Sensei. You are the third Hokage, Hiraishin Sarutobi, Naruto said, placing a hand on his student's shoulder, his voice filled with a powerful, paternal pride. You are the finest shinobi this village has ever produced. You have a strength of will and a love for this village that is second to none. I am not entrusting this to the Hokage. I am entrusting it to you. He gave his student a final, sad smile. Live a good life, Hiraishin. Protect the village. Protect our family. Be the king that I know you are. A few years later, the news spread through the shinobi nations like a mournful wind. Naruto Uzumaki, the guardian sage of Konoha, the last of the legendary founders, had passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. A grand funeral was held, a day of global mourning for the man who had brought the world an unprecedented era of peace. His wives, his children, his grandchildren, and his entire village wept for their lost hero, their father, their foundation. But deep beneath the earth, in a chamber shielded from the flow of time itself, the guardian sage did not die. He lay down in the stone sarcophagus, and with a final pulse of chakra, activated the most powerful sealing jutsu he had ever conceived. A seal not of containment, but of slumber. His consciousness faded, the river of time finally releasing him from its relentless current. His long watch was over. And he slept, dreaming of a future he had saved, waiting for a day he hoped would never come. Alright guys, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Once again, huge thanks to all of my Patreons. Making these videos would be impossible without you guys' support, and I'm extremely grateful for all the love and engagement you guys keep showing. Anyways y'all, have a wonderful day, and until next time, peace.